Welcome back, legends. You're at Harryverse X. Another incredible story awaits. What if Zeus and Poseidon found Harry in the cupboard and raised him as king of sky and sea? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1, The Cupboard That Held a Storm. The storm came without warning. That was the thing Petunia Dursley would remember most vividly in the years that followed, not the bundle on the doorstep, not the letter tucked inside the blankets, not even the scar shaped like a lightning bolt on the infant's forehead. What she would remember, lying awake in the small hours of many subsequent nights, was that the sky had been perfectly clear when Vernon locked up the house and went to bed, and then somewhere between midnight and 3 in the morning, the entire firmament had cracked open like something ancient and furious had struck it from the inside. She heard it before she saw it. A sound like the world clearing its throat. She padded to the window in her dressing gown and looked out at Privet Drive, which was doing its level best to be entirely ordinary under extraordinary circumstances. The street lamps were flickering. Not the electrical stutter of a blown fuse, something rhythmic, almost deliberate, like a pulse. The oak tree at the end of the Dursleys' garden was bent nearly horizontal despite the fact that there was, as far as Petunia could tell, absolutely no wind. And at the end of the front path, half visible in the jumping light, sat a wicker basket with a bundle in it that Petunia's stomach already knew was a baby before her eyes confirmed it. She went downstairs. She told herself she was going to call the police. She told herself many things on the way to the front door. She opened it and felt the air change immediately, warmer somehow, charged, like standing too close to a transformer box. The baby in the basket was awake and silent, dark eyes open, tracking the sky with an expression of profound interest that no infant should have been able to manage. There was a letter. There was a scar. Petunia read the letter once, sat down on the cold stone step, and read it again. She was still sitting there when the clouds arrived. They came from the north and the east simultaneously, great rolling banks of them, purple-black and lit from within by a continuous stuttering light that was emphatically not ordinary lightning. The thunder, when it came, had a quality to it that Petunia would never be able to adequately describe to Vernon. It was not just loud, it was intentional, the way a slammed door is intentional, the way a voice raised in anger is intentional. It shook the windows in their frames. It woke the Dursleys' neighbor's cat, who streaked out of his garden and did not stop running for 3 streets. And then the rain began. Not falling, arriving, the way a sentence arrives when someone has decided they have been patient long enough. Petunia grabbed the basket and retreated inside. She stood in the hallway, clutching Lily's letter to her chest, listening to the storm tear at the roof, and she made a decision that she would later recognize as the moment her life divided cleanly into before and after. She put the basket in the cupboard under the stairs. She told herself it was temporary. Just until morning. She would figure something out in the morning. Outside, the storm raged for exactly 11 more minutes and then stopped completely. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Petunia had ever heard. She did not sleep. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, and she listened to the baby in the cupboard, who made no sound at all. What Petunia did not see, because she had already retreated inside, was what happened on Privet Drive in the 3 minutes between the storm's peak and its sudden cessation. 2 figures materialized at the end of the path in the manner of people who had never needed a door and had no intention of starting now. The first was tall in the way that mountains are tall, not a matter of inches but of impression, of something that makes the surrounding space reorganize itself to accommodate its presence. He wore what appeared to be a dark suit of modern cut, but there was something about the fabric that moved wrong, heavier than cloth should be, the way deep water moves. His beard was close-cropped, salt and pepper, his eyes the particular gray-green of the Atlantic in November. He stood very still and looked at the empty doorstep with an expression that was not quite grief and not quite anger but contained components of both. Poseidon, god of the sea, earthshaker, lord of horses, looked at the place where a basket had sat 30 seconds ago and felt something shift in his chest that he had not felt in several centuries. The second figure appeared beside him with less ceremony, which was unusual, because ceremony was generally this one's preferred mode of arrival. Zeus, lord of Olympus, king of the gods, father of gods and men, stood on an ordinary suburban pavement in Little Whinging, Surrey, and looked at the closed front door of number 4 with an expression his children would have recognized immediately and his wife would have identified as the precise look he got before a decision that could not be undone. "She took him inside," Poseidon said. "I can see that. The letter was Dumbledore's work." "I know whose work it was." Zeus's voice was conversational, pleasantly modulated, the kind of voice that made the air vibrate very slightly at the lower frequencies. "Blood wards. Old magic. He thinks he's being clever. He is being clever. It would work. The boy would be protected." Zeus turned to look at his brother with an expression of such exhausting patience that Poseidon felt it like a physical thing. "Protected," he repeated. "Yes. In a cupboard." A pause. "You felt it too," Poseidon said. "It was not a question. Of course I felt it. The whole of Olympus felt it when Voldemort's curse broke." Something in that boy, Zeus stopped. Looked at the door again. Something in that boy should not be possible. And yet. Zeus straightened his cuffs with the precise gesture of a man who has already made a decision and is simply allowing himself the dignity of appearing to still be thinking. "The fates were laughing tonight. You know what their laughter sounds like." Poseidon did know. He had heard it when Achilles was born. He had heard it again at Troy. It sounded like the moment before a wave broke on rock, anticipatory, inevitable, almost gleeful. "Dumbledore will notice," Poseidon said. "He has eyes everywhere. Dumbledore has eyes everywhere in the wizarding world. We are not in the wizarding world." Zeus glanced sideways at his brother with the particular half-smile that had preceded, throughout history, approximately 400 significant problems. "We are merely two travelers who happen to be passing through Surrey." Another pause, longer this time. "We know nothing about raising a human child," Poseidon said. "I have raised several. You have sired several. There's a difference. Most of them ended up fighting monsters or being turned into constellations. Heracles turned out fine." "Did he?" Zeus opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the door again. "He turned out fine eventually." The door of number 4, Privet Drive remained stubbornly closed. Behind it, in a cupboard under the stairs, a baby with a lightning bolt scar lay in a wicker basket and looked up at the dark with his mother's eyes and waited with a patience that was not normal for an infant of his age, as though he already understood, in some wordless way, that the people who were supposed to want him did not, and that something else was coming instead. Zeus walked up the path. He did not knock. The door opened anyway, not with a bang or a crash, just a quiet cooperative surrender, the deadbolt drawing back, the handle turning, the wood swinging inward the way a door does for someone it has decided not to argue with. Petunia Dursley was standing in the hallway. She looked at Zeus. She looked at Poseidon. She looked at the two of them together on her doorstep in the middle of the night and her mouth opened and closed twice without producing any sound. "Good evening," Zeus said pleasantly. "We're here for the child," Poseidon said. "The one in the cupboard," Zeus added, in case there was any ambiguity. Petunia's hand went to the letter still clutched against her chest. "You can't," Dumbledore said, "the blood wards, yes, well." Zeus tilted his head with the air of someone declining to get into a longer explanation than was necessary. "Dumbledore says many things. We are not particularly obligated to agree with them. Who are you?" The quality of the air in the hallway changed in a way that made the question feel slightly retroactively unwise, as though the walls themselves had realized Petunia had accidentally asked something that the answer to would be more than she was equipped to process. Both figures on the doorstep looked at her with the same expression, patient, ancient, marginally amused. "People who can give that child something you cannot," Poseidon said. His voice had shifted into something quieter, resonant in a way that Petunia felt in her teeth. "A life worth living." Petunia looked at the cupboard door under the stairs. Then back at the two men. Then at the letter in her hand. Then she stepped aside. It was, Harry would later be told, the kindest thing Petunia Dursley ever did for anyone. The thing about growing up on Olympus was that it made a certain kind of strangeness feel entirely ordinary. Harry learned to walk on the marble floors of halls that stretched so wide you could see the curvature of them, where the columns held up ceilings that occasionally weren't there at all, replaced by the open sky, blue, blazing, shifting through dawn and dusk and storm on what seemed to be its own schedule. He learned to talk in 3 languages simultaneously, which was less a skill than a fact of life when your primary carers included a god who had been speaking since before languages had names and another who communicated half his moods through the weather. He learned to swim before he learned to properly run. Poseidon's palace beneath the Aegean was cool and vast and full of light that came from everywhere and nowhere, filtering through thousands of feet of water to produce something warm and blue and perpetually golden. The corridors were full of creatures that had no names in any mortal catalogue, things that moved like thoughts through water, that responded to mood rather than command, that occasionally brought Harry interesting rocks or luminous shells and left them outside his rooms with what he could only interpret as gifts. He kept every single one of them. By the time he was 4, his room in the Sea Palace had the best collection of unusual stones of any child in 3 pantheons. Zeus taught him lightning first. Not as a weapon, Harry was 3, and Zeus had enough sense not to arm a 3-year-old, though Hephaestus would later question this claim. He taught him lightning the way you teach a child to recognize a family member: this is yours, this is part of what you are, this will always come when you call it. Harry had held it in his small fist and looked at it with the same expression he'd had on his first night, that profound, particular interest, and then said, again, in Greek, and Zeus had felt something move through his chest that he had not, if pressed, been able to name as anything other than joy. Poseidon taught him tides. The push and pull of things. How to feel what was beneath the surface of something, water, stone, or person, without needing to look. How to be patient in the way that the sea was patient, which was a specific kind of patience, not passive, not resigned, but the patience of something that knows that time is on its side and has decided not to rush. Between them, in the space of 10 years, they made something remarkable. Harry at 11 was not what anyone who had met the Dursleys would have predicted, and not quite what Dumbledore had planned for, and exactly what the Fates had been laughing about that night on Privet Drive. He was not particularly large for his age. He was wiry in the way that things tested repeatedly by resistance become wiry, corded with something that suggested force without advertising it. He had his mother's eyes, green and incisive, and a habit of going very still when he was thinking that made him seem older than he was. The scar on his forehead had not faded, as Zeus had half expected it to under the influence of divine power. If anything, it was more visible than it had been at birth, slightly raised, slightly iridescent, catching the light in a way that suggested it had absorbed rather than merely recorded the magic that made it. He wore his hair in the permanent state of optimistic chaos that it had apparently decided on in infancy and no divine intervention had ever successfully altered. He had read every book in 3 divine libraries before he was 9. He had beaten Ares in a sparring match when he was 10, which had caused a diplomatic incident that Hera was still technically annoyed about. He spoke to storms the way other children spoke to pets. This was both a metaphor and a literal description. On the morning of September the 1st in the year he turned 11, Harry was sitting on the edge of the easternmost terrace of Zeus's mountain hall with a cup of nectar gone cold beside him, reading a text on advanced magical theory, Flamel's Principles of Alchemical Transmutation, borrowed without permission from Athena's library, which she had noticed and pointedly not mentioned, when the owl arrived. It was a fairly ordinary owl by divine standards. It dropped the letter in Harry's lap with the professional efficiency of the Royal Mail and departed. Harry picked up the envelope and read the front. Mr. H. Potter, The Marble Terrace, Hall of Zeus, Mount Olympus. He turned it over. Red wax, a seal, a lion, an eagle, a badger, a snake arranged around a large letter H, Hogwarts, he said. He had known it was coming. Poseidon had mentioned it obliquely the previous winter, and Zeus had been vague about it in the specifically over-casual way that meant he had been thinking about it a great deal. Harry had done his own research, which was a habit he developed early on the grounds that asking Zeus for information tended to produce approximately 4 times more information than was useful, delivered with a structural enthusiasm for digressions. He read the letter. Then he picked up his cold nectar, took a sip, and looked out at the view of ancient mountains and morning light below and thought about it. A school. For human wizards. For people who had been taught that magic was something you learned in classrooms from textbooks, something that followed rules someone had written down and tested and graded. A world that had been building itself around his non-existence for a decade, had apparently been expecting a very specific kind of boy to step off a train in September, and was going to receive instead someone who had spent 3 years studying lightning from the inside. He was aware that some people might find this intimidating. He found it, if he was honest, quite funny. "Zeus," he said, without raising his voice. The wind shifted. A presence settled into the terrace the way a weather system settles over a landscape, not arriving so much as being there where it had not been before. Zeus leaned against the balustrade with his arms folded and looked at the letter in Harry's hand with an expression of studied nonchalance that fooled neither of them. "It came, then," Zeus said. "It came." Harry held it up. "Hogwarts. You knew about this." "I knew about this. And you were going to tell me. I was letting you enjoy a few more months of not having a school schedule." Harry squinted at him. Zeus was doing the face, the one that looked like casual ease and contained within it the particular tension of a man who had made a decision and was waiting to see how it landed. Harry had learned to read Zeus the way Poseidon had taught him to read weather systems, by feeling the pressure, not watching the surface. "You want me to go," Harry said. "I want you to choose," Zeus said, which was technically a different thing, and also Zeus's version of the same thing. "But. Yes. There are things in that world that want your attention. Or that your attention should be on." He paused. "There is a man named Dumbledore, I know about Dumbledore." Zeus raised an eyebrow. "You've been reading about the wizarding world." "I've been reading about my history. There's a prophecy." Harry set the letter down on his knee. "I found the Trelawney prediction 2 years ago in the Fates archives. I wasn't supposed to be in there, which is probably why they left it somewhere I'd find it." The silence that followed had the quality of a man reassessing a situation he thought he had been managing and discovering he had been managed in return. "The Fates," Zeus said carefully. "Amuncham. You went into, you were busy. There was a thing with Ares and the new spear design. Poseidon was doing something with the Atlantic currents. I had an afternoon free." Harry picked up the letter again and looked at the Hogwarts crest. "The prophecy's interesting. The bit about the power the Dark Lord knows not. I have some theories." Zeus looked at his ward for a long moment with an expression that combined the profound exasperation of a man who had been outwitted by an 11-year-old with something that looked, quietly, like pride. "Your father would like to be consulted occasionally," Zeus said. "For the sake of form. I'll write him a summary." Harry turned the letter over in his hands. "I'll go. Hogwarts. The wizarding world." He looked up. "But I'm going as what I am. Not as what Dumbledore planned for." "Obviously," Zeus said, with the tone of a man for whom that had never been in question. "He built a plan around a boy who grew up afraid. Isolated. Dependent on being guided." Harry stood, picking up the cold nectar, the letter, the flannel book all in one motion. "I'm not that. And I'm not going to pretend to be." "No," Zeus agreed. "You are not." "Good." Harry looked at the Hogwarts seal one more time. A lion, an eagle, a badger, a snake. 4 houses. 1 school. 1 world that thought it knew exactly what he was. "I think I'll enjoy this," he said, sounding genuinely pleased about it in a way that would, later, cause several Hogwarts professors to reach for very strong tea. He went inside to pack. Poseidon found out about the letter the same way Poseidon found out about most things, late, because he had been doing something vast and oceanic in the South Pacific, and Zeus had not sent word until the thing was already decided, because Zeus had not technically been wrong in anything he'd told Harry but had made several careful decisions about sequencing. The sea, in the 3 hours between Poseidon receiving Zeus's message and arriving at the mountain hall, was notably rough across several unconnected ocean basins, which marine biologists later attributed to an unusual convergence of thermocline disruptions and which was, in fact, a god being irritated. He arrived in the hall with the controlled energy of a man who has decided not to make a scene but is reserving the right to feel strongly about things, and found Harry in the library surrounded by 4 stacks of books, a packing trunk, and what appeared to be a detailed hand-drawn map of the United Kingdom. "Zeus said you, I know." Harry didn't look up from the book he was cross-referencing with the map. "He told me first." Poseidon sat down across from him and looked at the spread of books. He recognized several titles: Hogwarts, A History, Modern Magical Theory, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, and others he didn't, which was unusual enough to be interesting. "You could have come to me," Poseidon said. "When you found the Fates archive. You could have asked." Harry looked up then. His mother's eyes, the green of shallow water over pale sand, warm and clear and going deeper in a way that made you want to know the depth. "I didn't want you to think you needed to protect me from it," he said. "The prophecy. I wanted to read it with my own eyes and decide what I thought." "And what did you think?" Harry considered this with the same precise attention he gave to everything. "I thought it explained the scar. I thought it explained why Voldemort tried and failed. I thought the phrasing was interesting, neither can live while the other survives. Not neither can survive. Not one must die. It leaves more room than people seem to think it does." He paused. "I also thought that whoever this Dark Lord is, he's been running for 10 years from a threat he could have ended if he hadn't made structural decisions that significantly reduced his own capacity for independent thought. Which is its own kind of lesson." Poseidon was quiet for a moment. "You are going to scare the life out of that school," he said, with something in his voice that was not quite laughter but was close enough. "Only the parts of it that deserve it." Harry turned a page. "The rest of it I think will be fine. There will be people worth knowing." "How do you know?" "Because interesting places always have interesting people in them." Harry looked up again, and this time there was something in his face that was younger than his usual composure, a flicker of something genuine, unguarded, that Poseidon recognized as excitement. "I want to meet the ones who are worth knowing. I've spent 10 years with gods. I want to know what people are like." The word landed in the room quietly. "People. Not mortals, not humans, not wizards, people," said with the specific warmth of someone who had been thinking about this for longer than they'd admitted. Poseidon felt it again, the thing in his chest that the infant in the basket had first summoned. It sat there now and was large and warm and extremely inconvenient. "You're taking the trident pendant," he said. "Obviously. And the storm cord bracelet. Zeus's work. Already packed." "And you'll call," Poseidon said. "If something, Poseidon." Harry's voice was quiet and sure. "I've wrestled the Kraken. I've navigated the maelstrom. I've had an actual argument with the moire about probability. I'm going to a boarding school in Scotland. The Kraken was supervised. It was not that supervised. I was there. You were watching from a very safe distance and being very interested in how I handled it." A pause. Something in Poseidon's expression shifted, rearranging itself from parental concern into something more honest, which was not actually less warm. "You handled it very well," he said. "I know." Harry smiled. It was a quick, bright, unguarded thing, there and gone in a moment, and it changed his face completely, dropped the composure and the steadiness and showed something underneath that was young and genuine and warm. "Thank you. For, you know. All of it." Poseidon looked at him, this boy who had come to him as a scar and a storm and a letter on a doorstep, and thought about everything he had taught him and everything the teaching had unexpectedly returned, which was more than he had given. Don't thank me, he said. Go make something of it. Harry closed the book, stood, and began stacking things into the trunk with methodical efficiency. Oh, I intend to, he said. The night before Harry left for the wizarding world, Zeus found him on the North Terrace, which was where Harry went when he wanted weather, and the weather tonight was cooperative, offering a deep blue dusk stacking into purple at the horizon, the first stars arriving with the casual confidence of things that had been doing this for several billion years. Zeus stood beside him and they both looked at the sky in the easy silence of two people who had had enough conversations that silence had become a language of its own. You know what Dumbledore expects, Zeus said finally. A damaged boy. Grateful. Guidable. He's not a bad man. I know that. Harry's voice was even. That's what makes it complicated. He's a good man who built his entire plan around a specific kind of suffering, and his plan is probably right, if the boy in that plan existed. But that boy grew up in a cupboard. He paused. I didn't grow up in a cupboard. No, Zeus agreed. You grew up in a storm. And the sea. And the sea. Zeus looked at the horizon. He'll try to manage you. Guide you toward what he needs you to be. He's very good at it. I know. He'll use people you care about. That's fine. I'll care about people and he can use whatever he wants. People aren't levers unless they agree to be. Harry looked at the first star. He'll figure out eventually that it doesn't work the way he planned. I'm not going to make it a confrontation, I'm just going to be what I am and let him adjust to that. Zeus was quiet for a moment. And if he doesn't adjust? Harry smiled, still looking at the sky, and it was a different smile from the one he'd given Poseidon, older, clearer, the smile of someone who has looked at a complicated situation and is not afraid of it. Then we'll have a conversation, Harry said. And I'm better at conversations than most people expect. Zeus made a sound that was, in the privacy of a near-empty terrace with no one else to witness it, a laugh. Small and genuine and surprised out of him, the way laughter is when it's real. You realize, he said, that I have absolutely no concerns about this. Good. Which is unusual. I have concerns about everything. It's structural to the role. I know. You've told me. Harry turned from the sky to look at Zeus directly. You and Poseidon are going to argue about whether to intervene if things go wrong, aren't you? We already have been. Since this morning. And? Zeus straightened. Adjusted his cuffs, the small tell, the gesture that meant a decision had been made. We decided that you will handle what you encounter. And that if something requires divine attention, I'll ask. Yes. I won't need to. Probably not. Zeus paused. But ask anyway. For form's sake. For form's sake, Harry agreed. There was a rumble in the distance, the sky's version of a clearing throat, the way Zeus's weather behaved when he wasn't paying attention to containing it. Harry reached out without looking and the edge of the distant storm rolled back to a more respectable distance. Zeus looked at his son, the word landed in his mind without ceremony, simply true, as it had been for years now, and felt the particular combination of pride and loss that every parent feels on the eve of departure, divine or otherwise. You're going to be remarkable, Zeus said. I already am, Harry said, entirely without arrogance, simply as a statement of observable fact. And then he grinned, and he was 11 again, and Zeus put his arm around him and they stood together on the mountain and watched the last of the light go out of the sky over a world that had absolutely no idea what was coming. The morning was clear and bright and entirely ordinary. Harry walked to the edge of the terrace with his trunk packed and his school letter in his jacket pocket and the trident pendant warm at his collarbone and the storm-cord bracelet loose on his wrist. The sky above him was the specific endless blue of an early autumn morning, and somewhere in it, many miles southeast, there was a school on a loch in Scotland that was preparing itself for a new year. He thought about the baby in the basket. He thought about a cupboard under a staircase, dark and small and close, and a family that had chosen not to want him. He did not feel sorry about it. He had learned long ago that grief for a life not lived was not the same as grief for a life lost. The first was a ghost, the second was real. And his life, the one he had actually lived, with lightning in his hands and oceans under his feet and two ancient, infuriating, magnificent fathers arguing loudly about whether he should bring extra winter robes, had been real in every way that mattered. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he thought about his mother. Not as an absence. More like a light seen at a distance, warm, uncertain, impossible to reach and not quite impossible to feel. He knew her story. He had read it in Athena's library and in the Fates archive and in a small handwritten letter that Poseidon had quietly kept for him against the day Harry was old enough to want it. Lily Potter née Evans, who had loved fiercely and chosen freely and died to give her son a chance at life. He touched the scar on his forehead briefly, something he rarely did. Her magic was in it. He had always known that. The way it sat warm when the rest of him was calm, the way it pulsed sometimes like a second heartbeat. She had given him her love as an actual, structural, magical thing, the way only someone who understood power at its most fundamental would know how to do. He had two fathers who were gods. He had a mother who had defeated a god with love. He thought he understood, now, what the prophecy meant by the power the Dark Lord knows not. And it had nothing to do with being limited or afraid or dependent on anyone's guidance. He picked up his trunk. Right, he said to the morning, to the sky, to the school in Scotland and the world beneath it and the prophecy in the Fates archive and Dumbledore's careful plans and a Dark Lord somewhere out there who had been running from a ghost for 10 years. Let's see what you've got. He stepped off the terrace. He did not fall. He never did. Chapter 2, Diagon Alley doesn't know what hit it. The leaky cauldron smelled like old wood and spilled butterbeer and the particular musty warmth of a building that had been occupied for several centuries without ever being meaningfully aired out. Harry stepped through the front door off Charing Cross Road at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning and stood for a moment just inside the threshold, letting his eyes adjust from the sharp September light outside to the amber dimness within. It was busier than he'd expected. Witches and wizards in robes of varying quality occupied most of the tables, nursing drinks, exchanging gossip, reading copies of what he assumed was the wizarding newspaper. A fire crackled in a hearth that was too large for the room and made the whole space feel like the inside of a lamp. Behind the bar, a man who appeared to be assembled entirely from wrinkles was polishing a glass with a cloth of dubious cleanliness and watching Harry with the particular attention of someone who recognized a face and was trying to remember why. Harry had read about the leaky cauldron. He had also, because he believed in primary sources, spent 3 months reading wizarding history in enough detail that he could have told you which minister of magic had ordered the renovation of 1782, which he would not, because that was the kind of information that was only useful in very specific circumstances. He walked to the bar. Tom, he said, because the barman's name was Tom and Harry had always found that using someone's name immediately shifted the quality of a conversation. The barman's polishing slowed. He squinted. Then his expression changed, a rapid series of small movements crossing his face like weather, ending on something that was openly odd in a way that Harry found both touching and slightly exhausting. "You're him," Tom said. "You're Harry Potter." "I am." "We thought, everyone thought, no one knew where you'd." Tom stopped. Looked at the scar. Looked at the green eyes, the dark hair, the 11-year-old boy standing at his bar with a school trunk and a posture that did not belong on an 11-year-old. "Bless me," he said softly. "I need to get through to Diagon Alley," Harry said. "And I'd appreciate if the conversation about my being here stayed behind the bar for now." Tom blinked. Of course, Mr. Potter. Right this way." He led Harry through the pub, and Harry noticed as they went that heads were turning, that whispers were starting, that the specific frequency of a room changing its attention was rippling from table to table. He had expected this. The wizarding world had been telling itself a story about Harry Potter for 10 years. He was prepared for the fact that walking into it would mean walking into a story already in progress. He was less prepared for the man who stood up from a table near the back. Large. Very large, the kind of large that suggested some interesting genealogy, broad across the shoulders in a way that made the chair he'd been sitting in seem structurally optimistic, with a wild black beard and bright black eyes and an expression of such uncomplicated delight that it was, briefly, startling. Harry. The voice was not so much loud as enormous, the way some sounds are just fundamentally bigger than others. Every head in the pub turned. Tom froze. Harry looked at the large man, who was crossing toward him with the momentum of someone who had not yet fully decided what he was going to do when he got there. Hagrid. Rubeus Hagrid. Gamekeeper at Hogwarts, first-generation wizard, known for a specific soft-heartedness regarding dangerous creatures. Harry had read about him in 3 separate wizarding histories and 1 memoir. He also looked like a man who had been waiting a long time for this moment and was now experiencing it with his whole body. Harry held out his hand. Hagrid stopped, looked at it, and then grasped it in both of his own, which were the approximate size and texture of well-worn oven gloves. Hagrid, Harry said. I'd heard you might be coming to meet me. Hagrid's expression cycled rapidly through several emotions. How'd ya, Dumbledore said, Dumbledore sent you, yes. Harry kept his voice easy, pleasant. He was going to send you to Privet Drive to collect me and bring me to Diagon Alley himself. Except I'm not at Privet Drive, so, here we both are. Happy coincidence. Hagrid stared at him for a long moment. Where've ya been? He asked. Everyone, Harry, everyone's been wondering. Yeah, just vanished, after that night. I've been somewhere safe, Harry said. Better than safe, actually. He looked at Hagrid's face, open, worried, warm with a concern that was completely genuine and unperformed, and felt something settle. He had expected the wizarding world to come at him through politics, through Dumbledore's careful choreography, through the mechanism of reputation and prophecy. He had not quite expected to encounter, immediately, someone who was worried about him simply because they were kind. I'm all right, Harry added, and made it gentle because it deserved to be gentle. I've been very all right. I promise. Hagrid's beard shifted around what Harry identified as a smile trying to happen in difficult conditions. He blinked rapidly several times. Yeah, look, he stopped. Started again. Yeah, look like your dad. Ruined the jaw. But the eyes, my mother, Harry said. Yeah. Hagrid's voice had gone quiet. Yeah, exactly, her eyes. He straightened up, cleared his throat, recalibrated from emotional to practical with the efficiency of someone who had long experience of redirecting himself when feelings threatened to overwhelm. Right, then. Gringotts first, I reckon. Dumbledore's given me something to pick up while we're there. And you'll want your school things. Lead the way, Harry said. Tom was still standing frozen near the back door to the alley. Harry looked at him. Tom startled back into motion and tapped the wall with his wand, and the bricks began folding themselves aside, and Diagon Alley opened up in front of them like a secret kept by the city, like magic trying to explain itself to the daylight. Harry stepped through, and the world changed. It was not that Diagon Alley was larger than he'd expected. It was that it was louder in every sense, color and smell and sound compressed into a cobbled street that bent out of sight in both directions, lined with shops whose signs competed enthusiastically for attention. Cauldrons in the window of a shop to his left, stacked in sizes from thumble to hip-high. Robes in another, a mannequin in midnight blue rotating in the window with professional hauteur. An apothecary exuding something that was not quite fragrance and not quite smoke. An owl emporium in which approximately 40 owls were conducting their own separate dramas with varying degrees of dignity. And people. Families, students, shopkeepers, people moving with the ease of belonging to a world that fit them. Children pointing at things. Parents consulting lists. A very small girl arguing with her mother about whether a purple cauldron was a practical choice. An old wizard asleep on a bench with a newspaper over his face while an orange cat regarded him with professional disdain. Harry stood in the middle of it and felt something move through him, not quite longing, but something adjacent to it. Recognition of a kind. These were people who had been born into magic the way he had been born into storms, who wore it as simply as skin. He had known gods and monsters and ancient mysteries. He had not known this, ordinary magic, comfortable magic, magic as the texture of everyday life. He found that he liked it immediately. Gringotts, Hagrid said from somewhere above and to his left. The bank. Up here. Harry followed him toward the end of the alley where white marble steps climbed to bronze doors, then silver doors, then the vast interior of the Wizarding Bank which greeted them with the particular atmosphere of an institution that had been managing other people's wealth since before the concept of managed wealth had been formally articulated. The goblins were watching him from the moment he walked in. Not all of them visibly, goblins were far too professional for that, but he felt it, the slight redirection of attention that a room makes when something unexpected enters it. He had not spent 10 years being trained by Poseidon without developing a sensitivity to the underwater quality of unspoken awareness. The tallest goblin at the central desk looked at Harry with eyes that were several shades darker than his skin and approximately as readable as polished obsidian. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said, which was not a greeting so much as a statement of established fact. "Good morning," Harry said. He stepped up to the desk without hesitation. "I'd like to access my vault. And I imagine there are several account matters that haven't been attended to in about 10 years that we should probably discuss at some point." The goblin, whose nameplate read Griphook, blinked. Just once. It was, Harry suspected, the goblin equivalent of a surprised shout. "Indeed," Griphook said. "Your account manager will wish to see you." "I thought they might." Hagrid, beside him, was looking between Harry and the goblin with an expression of a man watching something he couldn't quite follow but was fairly sure was significant. They were led through the echoing marble interior, past tellers and vaults and the general theater of institutional wealth, to a side office where a senior goblin named Ragnarok sat behind a desk covered in ledgers and looked at Harry with the particular expression of a professional who has encountered something that requires the reassessment of several prior assumptions. "The Potter account," Ragnarok said, opening the uppermost ledger, "has remained in a standard managed state for the past decade. Interest has compounded correctly." "The properties, how many properties?" Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him. 3. The primary estate in Godric's Hollow, currently unoccupied. A London townhouse in Islington, also unoccupied. A cottage in Wales held in trust under a secondary instrument. And the vault itself? Ragnarok named a figure. It was a substantial figure, the kind of number that had a significant impact on the available options in a life. Harry noted it. "There's also the matter," Ragnarok said carefully, "of certain items held in the secondary vault. Not financial instruments. Objects. Several of which are flagged by our curse breakers as carrying unusual magical signatures. My parents' belongings," Harry said. "Among others." "Yes." Harry was quiet for a moment. "I'll want to review those eventually. Not today. Today I just need funds for school supplies." "Of course." Ragnarok produced a small golden key that he slid across the desk. Then he paused. "Mr. Potter. The account has been subject to a standing access authority. A secondary key was issued 10 years ago, under a notation regarding guardianship." Harry looked at him steadily. "Who holds the secondary key?" A pause that said several things without technically saying them. The access authority was established through a legal instrument citing protective guardianship. The authorizing party was Albus Dumbledore. The office was quiet for a moment. Through the marble walls, the distant sound of Gringotts conducting its business continued undisturbed. "Has that key been used?" Harry asked. "Twice. For administrative review. No withdrawals." Harry considered this with the same expression he used when Poseidon showed him a new current pattern, measuring it, understanding where it went, what it would carry. "I'd like that authority reviewed," he said. "And suspended pending my formal review of the terms." I'm of age in wizarding legal terms as of today as an emancipated minor, which I can establish through the instrument in the secondary vault. There's a document there from my parents' will, I believe. Ragnarok looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then he made a notation in the ledger with the brisk efficiency of a professional who has just encountered a client he intends to take seriously. I'll have the documentation prepared, he said. And Mr. Potter, he paused again, and something moved in the goblin's dark eyes that might, in better light, have been respect. Welcome to Gringotts. Hagrid, who had been sitting in the chair beside Harry with the expression of a man watching a chess game being played at a speed he couldn't entirely follow, leaned over as they left the office. How'd ye know about the will document? He said in what he probably thought was a whisper. I read everything in my parents' file, Harry said. In the Wisengamot Records Archive. It's a matter of public record if you know what forms to request. Ye can access if you know what forms to request, Harry repeated pleasantly. Hagrid stared at him. Then shook his head with a sort of amazed resignation and followed him toward the carts. The cart ride down to the vaults was, Harry would later note in his mental catalogue of experiences, genuinely excellent. The rattling plunge into darkness, the rush of mineral cold air, the brief impressionistic view of vast doors sliding past, it had the quality of a thing designed not just functionally but with some awareness of drama, and Harry appreciated that. His vault, when the door swung open, smelled like old gold and something underneath it that was faintly oceanic, the residue, he thought, of magic work near water. His parents' magic. He stood in the entrance for exactly 3 seconds, aware of it, then stepped in and gathered what he needed with practical efficiency. He did not linger. He had learned from Poseidon that the proper response to something vast and old and significant was not to stand in front of it being overwhelmed but to acknowledge it and move through it, because the only way to honor depth was to swim rather than stand on the shore marveling at it. Hagrid's visit to a different vault, deeper in the mountain, was conducted with such theatrical secrecy that Harry graciously pretended not to notice the small wrapped package the gamekeeper tucked into his coat with the subtlety of a person who had never attempted subtlety before. Whatever it was small and wrapped in brown paper and important enough that Dumbledore had sent Hagrid for it personally. Harry filed this information in the category labeled Things Worth Knowing More About Later and asked Hagrid whether he wanted to get a butterbeer before they started on the school supply list. Hagrid looked at him with what Harry was beginning to recognize as his default expression in Harry's company, which was a sort of wondering delight mixed with mild bewilderment. Yeah, Hagrid said. Yeah, all right. They did the shops in order of practicality, which was Harry's natural mode and which Hagrid fell into with good-natured adaptability. Madame Malkin's first for robes, where Harry was fitted with precise indifference to the pointed conversation being attempted by a pale blonde boy on the next fitting stand who had introduced himself as Draco Malfoy and was operating under the apparent assumption that the space between them constituted an invitation for a speech about house sorting preferences, superior bloodlines, and the general unworthiness of certain people at Hogwarts. Harry had let him finish. Then said, interesting position, in the tone of a person who finds a thing technically interesting without finding it compelling, which was worse than any argument Draco had been prepared for, and which caused the boy to sputter briefly before being collected by his mother. Madame Malkin, measuring Harry's hem, caught his eye in the mirror and winked. Books next, Flourish and Blots, where Harry already had most of what was on the list in various divine libraries and bought extras anyway because the wizarding editions had notes and annotations and marginalia that the clean archival copies didn't, and Harry had always preferred the versions of books that showed their working. He spent longer in the astronomy section than the list required, and in the charms theory section even longer, until Hagrid ate his way through a bag of toffees and gently suggested they had more shops to visit. The apothecary was pungent in the way that only a shop stocking things that were essentially concentrated biological consequence could be. Harry worked through the list quickly, added several optional ingredients to the pile, and asked the shopkeeper 3 questions about the properties of powdered bicorn horn that started a 15-minute conversation and ended with Harry leaving with 2 additional reference texts that the shopkeeper had pressed on him with the evangelical energy of someone who had finally found a customer who deserved them. The Owl Emporium was the last major stop, and this was where Harry paused. He didn't need an owl for communication in the conventional sense, He had means of reaching Olympus that predated postal services by several millennia. But owls were the wizarding world's connective tissue, and more than that, the shop was full of them, and Harry had an honest weakness for creatures that operated on their own terms. He walked slowly down the rows of perches, looking at each bird with genuine attention. The snowy owl in the corner had been watching him since he walked in. Not the restless tracking of a bird alert to movement, the particular, focused regard of a creature that had decided something. She was white and large and extremely composed, and she looked at Harry with amber eyes that had the quality of lamps. Harry looked back. "Hello," he said. She ruffled her feathers once, deliberately, and then was still again. "She's been like that all morning," the shopkeeper said, appearing at his elbow. "Usually she's not one for the customers. Very selective. We call her Athena, though she doesn't answer to it." Harry considered pointing out that the actual Athena had that exact quality of selective regard and also didn't answer to things she found beneath her notice, and decided this was probably not a useful contribution. "How much?" he said. She came home with him in a cage that she condescended to occupy with the energy of a first-class passenger in a perfectly acceptable but notably substandard compartment. Harry named her Lyra, which she accepted. Ollivander's was last. The shop was narrow and deep and the shelves went up so high that the top ones disappeared into shadow that felt more like intention than inadequate lighting. It smelled like sawdust and something resinous and something else underneath that Harry could only describe as potential, the way the air smelled the moment before a lightning strike. The man who appeared from between two rows of shelves was not tall, but he occupied the space around him in a way that made height feel irrelevant. His eyes were pale silver, and when they landed on Harry they had the quality of instruments rather than organs, measuring, cataloging, aware. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said. "I wondered when you'd come." "Hello, Mr. Ollivander." The wand-maker moved toward him with the specific, gliding economy of motion of someone who has spent decades in a small space. His eyes went to the scar, then away, then back to Harry's face, and then to his hands in a way that felt less personal than technical, the assessment of a craftsman. "Your parents," Ollivander said. "James Potter, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. Lily Evans, willow, 10 1/4, swishy, very good for charms." He paused. And then there was the wand that, well. His pale eyes found the scar briefly. "We shall see what we find for you." He disappeared into the shelves with the shuffling, muttering efficiency of a man following a system that existed entirely in his own head and worked perfectly. He returned with 3 boxes, laid them out on the narrow counter with ceremony. "Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Give it a try." Harry picked it up. He felt the usual thing he felt when he held wands, a kind of conversational quality, an exchange of information, the way metal responds to a magnet. This one was pleasant, warm, reasonably interested. He gave it a small flick. A cascade of sparks, deep gold, warm. Ollivander's eyes sharpened. "Interesting," the wand-maker said. "Very unusual warmth to the," he stopped. Harry had set the wand down. "That one's fine," Harry said. "But I want to try the others." Ollivander blinked. "Most customers stop when they find one that, I want to understand the options." Harry looked at the remaining boxes. "May I?" Ollivander looked at him for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't entirely read, or rather, could read clearly enough that it was striking. This was a man who was recalibrating in real time. He gestured at the boxes. The second was rosewood and dragon heartstring, which responded to Harry with more heat than the first but less precision, enthusiastic, undiscriminating, the magical equivalent of someone who agreed with everything. The third was yew and unicorn hair, which was elegant and cool and slightly resistant in a way that felt like it was testing rather than cooperating. Harry picked up the holly wand again. Felt it respond with that warm readiness. "This one," he said. "I'd like to understand something first, though." The phoenix who gave the feather, there was only one other wand made from that same phoenix's feathers. The shop was very quiet. Outside, Diagon Alley went about its business. Inside, Ollivander was looking at Harry with those instrument eyes, and something had changed in his expression, a deepening of attention, a slight shift of weight. "You know," Ollivander said softly. It was not a question. "About the brother wand?" "Yes." Harry held the holly wand loosely, naturally, the way Poseidon had taught him to hold a weapon that was also a tool. "The phoenix is Dumbledore's bird. Which makes the connection, structurally interesting." "It makes the connection," Ollivander said, "very old, and very particular." "Connections can be renegotiated," Harry said. "If you understand them well enough." Ollivander looked at him for a long time. The pale eyes moved over Harry's face with the same measuring quality they'd had from the start, but now there was something else in them, the recognition of a craftsman for something that exceeds its specifications. 7 galleons, Ollivander said quietly. Harry paid him. At the door, Ollivander's voice followed him. "Mr. Potter." Harry turned. The old wand-maker was standing between his shelves with an expression that was not quite warning and not quite wonder but contained both. "We should expect great things from you. That much has always been true." He paused. "I confess I had imagined the greatness somewhat differently." "Most people do," Harry said. He stepped back into Diagon Alley, where Hagrid was waiting with a large bag of what Harry suspected were rock cakes and an expression of great relief at his reappearance. "Everything all right?" He wasn't. Hagrid squinted at him. "You look like something happened in there." "Just getting a wand," Harry said. "How are the rock cakes?" "Made myself this morning. Here, try one." The rock cake was, in the strictest culinary sense, concerning. Harry ate it in 4 bites and said it was excellent, and watched Hagrid's entire face become briefly radiant with pride, and thought that he had been right that morning on Olympus. Interesting places had interesting people in them. The trick was recognizing which was which. They were heading back toward the leaky cauldron when the trouble started. It was nothing dramatic in its beginning, a raised voice from an alley between 2 shops, the particular register of someone using their size as punctuation. Harry turned toward it without deciding to. Hagrid, a beat behind, made a sound that suggested he had noticed too. In the narrow side passage, 2 older boys, 5th years by their height, Hogwarts robes still partially on from what looked like a recently concluded school supply visit, had backed a smaller child against the wall. The smaller child was a girl, perhaps 9 or 10, not a Hogwarts student yet, with bushy brown hair and an expression that was attempting controlled composure and not entirely achieving it. She had dropped her books. There were 3 of them, the older boys, 1 blocking the exit, 2 advancing. "Think you'll be in Gryffindor," one of them was saying with the particular satisfaction of someone who has found a target. "Probably end up a right little know-it-all, won't she, her sort always, move," Harry said. He had not raised his voice. The word was not particularly loud. But it arrived in the alley with the quality of a stone dropped into still water, spreading out in rings, and all 3 boys turned. The one nearest him, big, confident, the type who had learned to leverage size early, looked at Harry with the automatic contempt of someone facing a smaller peer. "This doesn't concern, I disagree," Harry said. "Move away from her." Something in his voice made the 3 of them hesitate. Not the words were ordinary enough. Something underneath them. The way deep water sounds different from shallow water when you're in it. The big boy's confidence reasserted itself. "Who do you think you?" The sky above the alley darkened. Not the gradual overcast of incoming clouds but the instant, complete dimming of a light source suddenly redirected. Both boys on either side of the girl took an involuntary step back. The one in front of Harry did not step back, but something shifted in his posture, the microscopic recalibration that the body makes when it encounters something it hasn't categorized yet. Harry had not done anything. Not consciously. But the stormcord bracelet on his wrist had gotten several degrees warmer, and the air between him and the boy had taken on the electric quality that came just before a strike. He looked at the big boy with the calm patience of someone who is waiting for a decision to be made by someone else and is entirely comfortable waiting. The three boys left. Not running, they maintained enough dignity for that, but at a pace that communicated a unanimous decision to be somewhere else. Their footsteps faded quickly. The girl was still against the wall. She had gathered her books back up and was clutching them to her chest, watching Harry with large brown eyes in which the controlled composure had reasserted itself almost entirely. Almost. There was a brightness at the edges of her eyes that she was resolutely ignoring. "You're not actually a student yet," she said. "Your robes are new. You bought them today." Harry looked at her. "And you're from Hogwarts too, I can tell from the list," she continued, the words coming faster now, the composure route firmly chosen over the emotional one. "First year. I'm also a first year. My name is Hermione Granger. I've read Hogwarts, a history 4 times and I've already started on the second-year textbooks." She paused. Swallowed once. "Thank you. For that." "Hermione Granger," Harry said. "Harry Potter." The composure did a very interesting thing, it didn't crack, it simply became very still. Her eyes went to his forehead with the involuntary magnetism of someone who had read a great deal about something and was now encountering it for the first time. Then, visibly, she redirected them to his face. "I know who you are," she said carefully. "Everyone does, I suppose. Though no one knows where you've been." She studied him with the frank assessment of someone who has decided the most respectful thing she can do is not pretend she isn't curious. You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She considered this seriously, which Harry appreciated. "The books say you defeated you-know-who as an infant. Most people assume that was luck, or love magic, or both. They imagine," she stopped. "You look like you know what you are," she said, which was not what she had started to say but was clearly more accurate. "Most people don't look like that at 11. Hagrid had appeared at the entrance to the alley with his bag of rock cakes and the expression of a man who has witnessed something he is still processing. "We should keep moving," Harry said. "But Hermione." She looked at him. "Those boys will be at Hogwarts. If it happens again, it won't," she said, in a tone that suggested she had made several plans already. Then, slightly less certainly, "Will it?" "It won't," Harry confirmed, and something in his voice made it not a prediction but a statement of established future fact. She looked at him, startled, and then something complicated happened in her expression, the thing that happened when an intelligent person encountered something that exceeded the boundaries of their prior model and was deciding whether to adjust the model or request more data. She adjusted the model. "I'll see you at King's Cross, then," she said, picked up her books, and walked out of the alley with her head up and her back straight and the brightness at the edges of her eyes still being resolutely ignored. Harry watched her go. "Blimey," Hagrid said quietly from behind him. "She's something, isn't she?" "Yes," Harry agreed. "She is." The leaky cauldron was quieter when they returned, but not quiet enough that Harry missed the man sitting in the corner near the fire who was not drinking his drink and was looking at Harry with the kind of careful attention that was not curiosity but assignment. He was slight, with eyes that moved too deliberately for someone simply relaxing, a turban that seemed out of place in the warm room, and a small notebook that he wasn't writing in. He was working very hard at being unremarkable. Harry looked at him for exactly as long as it took to catalogue him, then looked away. Interesting. The turban was a peculiarity, it was a warm day, and the man was sitting near the fire, and his hands had the faint damp of someone who was running hotter than the room required. Something behind his eyes, too, the quality of a person who is two conversations at once, hearing something behind the surface one. The man registered Harry's glance and went very still for precisely 2 seconds before resuming his performance of relaxation. Not a casual observer. Not press, not merely curious. Someone with a purpose who had been positioned here before Harry arrived. Harry tucked this observation into the same mental filing system as the Gringotts Access Authority and Hagrid's wrapped package and the Hollywand's brother, which was becoming a well-populated folder on only the first day. "Who's that?" he asked Hagrid quietly. Hagrid glanced over with practiced casualness. "That's Professor Quirrell. Defense against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. He's bit odd, to be honest. Used to be different before he went travelin'. But he's harmless enough." Harry said. He watched Quirrell in his peripheral vision as they had a final butterbeer and Hagrid talked about Hogwarts with the particular love of someone for whom a place is home in every sense that matters. The professor did not speak to them. Did not approach. But when they left, Harry felt the specific awareness at the back of his neck that meant eyes following. He did not look back. He didn't need to. He already knew the shape of it, a man who was two things, and the second thing was paying very close attention to Harry Potter on the first day he appeared in the wizarding world. A man who was hot in a warm room, who had a professor's access and the eyes of someone receiving instructions. Not Voldemort. Voldemort had no body, according to everything Harry had read. But something adjacent. Something being used. He thought about Hagrid's wrapped package, small and brown and tucked inside a large coat with the careful secrecy of a man who trusted the wrong person to tell him it was important. He thought about Gringotts. About a vault being emptied of something significant on the same day a man who was two things watched him across a pub. The Philosopher's Stone, he thought, assembling pieces with the quiet efficiency that Poseidon had spent years building in him. Flamel's Stone. The one Dumbledore moved from Gringotts. The one that's going to Hogwarts. He had read Flamel. He owned Flamel's book. He knew what the stone did and what it was worth to someone who was less than a body, running out of time, needing a way back to the world. He stepped out of the leaky cauldron onto Charing Cross Road, where the ordinary city went about its ordinary business with magnificent indifference to all of this. "Hagrid," he said pleasantly. "The thing you picked up from the vault today. Is it going to Hogwarts?" Hagrid made the sound of a man whose carefully maintained secret has been addressed directly and is not sure whether to confirm or deny. "Can't say," Hagrid managed. "That's all right," Harry said. "I already know." He smiled at Hagrid's expression, the wonderful, helpless, wondering bewilderment that was becoming familiar, and flagged down a cab to take him to King's Cross. Behind him, in the leaky cauldron, a professor with a turban signaled for the bill and picked up his notebook and wrote nothing in it. Harry leaned back in the cab seat, let Lyra's cage rest between his feet, and watched London slide past the window. Somewhere in his chest, the thing that had been building since the morning on the terrace, the recognition of something beginning, the clean forward momentum of a story in motion, settled into its pace. He had 1 week before the Hogwarts Express. 1 week in which Dumbledore would be informed of his appearance, would recalibrate, would begin trying to assess what Harry was and who had made him and what it meant for the plan. In which Quirrell, or whatever rode behind Quirrell's eyes, would report that the boy had arrived and was not what had been expected. Harry watched London and thought about the stone, and Gringotts, and the brother wand, and a girl with brown eyes who had adjusted her model without being asked. He thought about Voldemort running from a ghost for 10 years, and what it would mean for him to discover that the ghost had grown up. He thought that the year ahead was going to be, in the most genuine sense of the word, interesting. He was looking forward to it. Chapter 3, The castle that thought it was impressive. King's Cross Station at 10:55 on the 1st of September was a cathedral of human motion, pigeons, trolleys, announcements, the smell of diesel and coffee and the particular exhaustion of people who had been traveling since early morning. Harry moved through it with his trunk on a trolley and Lyra's cage balanced on top, reading the departure boards with half his attention and using the other half to locate platform 9 3/4, which he had already deduced was accessed through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. He had not needed help finding it. He had also, because it was the kind of detail that mattered, arrived early enough to watch several wizarding families do it first. The Weasleys were impossible to miss. Not because of the red hair, though the red hair was considerable, 6 visible children ranging from what appeared to be mid-20s down to 11, plus a mother who moved through King's Cross with the competent authority of someone who had been organizing this departure for many years and had strong feelings about it being done correctly. They were warm and loud and slightly chaotic in the specific way of families who have more love than space for it, and Harry watched them cycle through the barrier in pairs with the practiced ease of a thing done many times. The youngest boy went last of the children, pushing his trolley toward the barrier with the particular combination of determined nonchalance and barely concealed excitement of someone experiencing something for the 11th time and finding it just as good as the first. He was about Harry's height, with freckles and an expression of open good nature that Harry noted and filed under worth knowing before the boy disappeared through the barrier. Harry followed 30 seconds later. The Hogwarts Express was read in the way that important things are sometimes exactly what they're supposed to be, the deep, confident read of something that has been doing its job for a very long time and sees no reason to change. Steam billowed across the platform in slow, theatrical waves. Owls and cats and one extremely anxious toad contributed to the general noise. Trunks were loaded, goodbyes were conducted at various emotional registers, and the whole magnificent organized chaos of first departures was in full operation. Harry found a compartment midway down the train that was empty and loaded his trunk and settled Lyra in the overhead rack and sat down. He had been there about 4 minutes when the door slid open and the youngest Weasley looked in with the expression of someone who has tried several compartments and found them all occupied. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Can I?" "Of course," Harry said. The boy came in and wrestled his trunk into the overhead with the efficiency of someone who had grown up doing physical things and didn't need to make a production of them. He sat down across from Harry, looked at him with the frank assessment of someone who hadn't yet learned to be subtle about curiosity, and said, "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." A pause. Ron's eyes went to the forehead with the same involuntary magnetism as Hermione's had, then came back to Harry's face. But where Hermione had gone immediately to composure and data, Ron's expression did something different, a beat of wide-eyed recognition, and then, visibly, a decision. "Right," Ron said. "Harry. Just the name. Not the legend, not the question. Just the name, offered back like an even trade." Harry felt something relax in him that he hadn't known was braced. "Ron," he said. They looked at each other across the compartment with the ease of two people who have, in the space of about 15 seconds, established the terms of something that could become a friendship. "My mum's going to be absolutely beside herself when I tell her you were on the train," Ron said, in the tone of a person who finds his mother's potential reaction more amusing than embarrassing. "She loves, well, everyone does, I suppose. The whole story. Defeat of you-know-who, the boy who lived." He stopped. "Sorry. Do people say that to you a lot?" "Haven't been in the wizarding world long enough for a lot," Harry said. "But yes, some. Does it bother you?" "Not particularly." Harry looked at him. "It's just a story people tell. I'm more interested in what's actually true." Ron absorbed this. "What is actually true?" "Everyone wonders where you've been." "Somewhere very good," Harry said. Ron waited a beat to see if more was forthcoming, determined it wasn't, and with the admirable practicality of someone who has grown up in a large family and understands that some questions get answered later or not at all, let it go. "Fair enough," he said, and pulled a package of what turned out to be an enormous number of sandwiches from his bag. "Corned beef," he said with mild resignation. "Mom always makes corned beef even though I've told her about 40 times, he stopped. Held out the package. "Want one?" "Fair warning." "I'm all right," Harry said. "But thank you." Ron ate his sandwiches with the cheerful stoicism of someone who has accepted that corned beef is his narrative. They talked, easily, naturally, with the rhythm of people who are both good at conversation for different reasons. Ron knew the wizarding world in the way that Harry knew storms, not studied, just absorbed, the texture of daily life. He knew Quidditch teams and their histories and current standings with a specificity that crossed into genuine passion. He knew the politics of the old families with the weary expertise of someone whose family existed in permanent principled opposition to several of them. He knew about Hogwarts in the way you know about a place your whole family has loved, which was different from knowing its history. He was funny, Harry noticed. Dry and quick, self-deprecating in a way that was comfortable rather than anxious. He didn't try to impress. He was simply there, talking, present in the conversation without performance, which Harry found, after 10 years of gods who made an art form of presence, genuinely refreshing. They were somewhere in the middle of a debate about whether the Chudley Cannon's ongoing record was a matter of structural mismanagement or simply historic bad luck when the compartment door opened again and Hermione Granger stepped in, looked at both of them, and said, "Have either of you seen a toad?" "Someone named Neville's lost one." Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Harry. "No toad," Harry said. Hermione looked at him and the composed recognition of their previous meeting settled across her expression like a key fitting a lock. "Oh. You're here." She said it less as a greeting than as the filing of a confirmed data point. "Hermione Granger," Harry said. "Ron Weasley. Hermione and I met in Diagon Alley." Ron looked between them. "Right," he said with the equanimity of a person who has decided to go with things rather than against them. "No toad, sorry. She might try further down the train." "I will." Hermione looked at the remaining space in the compartment with an expression that was visibly calculating available options. "I might come back, if that's all right. I've done all the reading and there's only so much time one can spend reviewing material one has already absorbed." "You're welcome here," Harry said. She nodded once, precisely, and left. Ron looked at Harry. "She's a lot, isn't she?" he said, not unkindly. "She's excellent," Harry said, with a certainty that made Ron blink. "She adjusted her model of me in about 30 seconds in Diagon Alley. Do you know how rare that is?" Ron considered this. "My brother Percy does that thing where he's decided what you are and you could literally transform into a dragon and he'd find a reason to fit it into his prior understanding." "Exactly. Hermione doesn't do that." Harry looked out the window at the countryside beginning to open up around them. "She's going to be formidable." Ron looked slightly impressed, slightly bemused, and entirely intrigued, which Harry was beginning to recognize as Ron's default state in new situations. "Hogwarts is going to be interesting this year," Ron said, with no idea how profoundly correct he was. The castle appeared at nightfall. They crossed the lake in the small boats with the other first years, 8 or 9 to a boat, the black water moving in slow swells beneath them and the castle rising above in a way that was genuinely, structurally impressive, lit from within, towers resolving out of the darkness as they drew closer, the sheer scale of it becoming apparent only gradually, the way large things reveal themselves. The other first years around Harry were gasping, pressing forward in the boats, faces tipped up. Harry looked at it with the appreciation of someone who had grown up in divine architecture, halls that touched the sky, palaces that began on the sea floor, and felt something that was not quite awe but was the respectful recognition one piece of old magic gives to another. The castle knew they were coming. He could feel it, the specific awareness of a place that was alive in the way that places inhabited by magic over centuries became alive, the accumulated consciousness of 10 centuries of spells and learning and human longing pressing through the stone walls in a warmth that was almost physical. Hogwarts, in some important way, was paying attention. He looked up at the castle and let it feel him back. Something in the light from the tallest tower seemed to shift, briefly, the way a lamp shifts when a hand passes near it. Then it steadied. Harry smiled and looked back at the water. Professor McGonagall met them in an entrance hall that was all firelight and echoing stone and the distant roar of hundreds of students already seated in the great hall. She was tall and precise, with the contained energy of someone who managed enormous competence with very little visible effort, and she looked at the cluster of first years with an expression that was professionally calibrated to be both welcoming and unsentimental. Her eyes found Harry immediately. He watched her find him, the green eyes, the scar, the unscheduled return of a boy who had been missing for a decade, and watched her process this with remarkable economy, a rapid sequence of controlled responses that resulted in her expression not changing at all. Impressive. She gave them the speech about the houses. Harry listened politely. Around him, his fellow first-years were in various states of nervous animation, whispering, fidgeting, one boy near the back who was almost certainly Neville Longbottom looking between his empty hands and his pockets with the expression of someone who had again lost a toad. Harry caught Hermione's eye across the group. She raised her eyebrows slightly in the specific Hermione way that meant I have read about this and am prepared. He gave her a small nod. Then the ghosts came through the wall. The collective flinch of the group was significant. Harry watched a nearly headless man in Elizabethan ruff drift through a stone column and felt the castle's warmth in that too. The ghosts were part of it, residual impressions of the people who had loved this place long enough to leave a mark. The grey lady near the door had a quality to her that was older than the others, and when she passed near Harry she paused, just for a moment, just a beat too long, and looked at him with eyes that were the color of old glass. He looked back. She moved on, but slowly, like something considering. McGonagall returned and led them into the Great Hall. The ceiling of the Great Hall was, as advertised, enchanted to reflect the sky outside, cloud-heavy and dark, with the first suggestion of stars breaking through in the east. For long tables, hundreds of faces turning, the accumulated light of thousands of candles floating in the air above. The noise level dropped sharply as the first years entered and kept dropping as people did what people always did when Harry walked into rooms, which was notice him. He heard his name pass through the hall in a wave, table to table. Potter. Harry Potter. It's him, it's Harry Potter. He walked with the same even pace he always walked with, looking forward, aware of everything. At the staff table, he identified them in the 3 seconds available before he had to redirect his attention forward, Dumbledore at the center, silver-bearded and watching Harry with blue eyes that were not performing surprise as well as they might have, Quirrell at the end of the row in his turban, looking at his plate, a woman with elaborate robes who would be Pomona Sprout, a man with oil-stained hands who had to be Flitwick adjacent to his raised chair, Snape. Snape was watching him with black eyes that contained several simultaneous things, the outermost layer of which was carefully constructed neutrality, the layer beneath that something sharp and old, and beneath that something Harry couldn't yet read. He filed Snape in a more complicated category than most, not straightforwardly antagonistic, not allied, operating by principles Harry didn't yet fully understand. He found his place in the first-year group and stood still while the hat was brought in. The sorting hat was ancient and shabby, and when it opened its brim to sing, the entire hall went quiet in the way halls went quiet for things that carried genuine authority. Harry listened to the song, rhyming, self-congratulatory in an endearing way, genuinely informative about the house system, with the focused attention he gave to everything that contained useful intelligence. Then the sorting began. He watched the hat work. It was quick on most of them, a few seconds, sometimes 10 or 15, occasionally less. Hermione, Gryffindor, announced with an immediacy that surprised no one who had spent any time with her. Neville Longbottom, who had indeed been holding a toad that he had found in his pocket, went Gryffindor after about 30 seconds, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. Ron was Gryffindor in under 5, which he received with a satisfaction that suggested a family precedent had been maintained. Potter, Harry. The hall was already quiet. The name made it something more than quiet, a specific, held quality, every pair of eyes converging, the collective breath of several hundred people performing the social function of a pause button. Harry walked up to the stool and sat down, and the hat was placed on his head. He felt it immediately, a presence in his mind, careful and old, probing at the edges of him the way a craftsman's hands probe the edges of an object, assessing structure, looking for the joins. Then, "Oh," said the hat. Internally, privately, it said it, a single syllable of genuine surprise from something that had been sorting students for 1,000 years and had apparently not been surprised in some time. "Well," it continued. "This is unusual." "I imagine," Harry said back. "You're aware of the process." "I've read about it." The hat was quiet for a moment in the way of something reassessing. Harry felt it moving through the layers of him, past the obvious things, the intelligence and the confidence, down into the deeper structural material. He let it look. He had nothing to conceal, and concealment would have been both pointless and rude. "There's an ocean in here," the hat said, sounding somewhere between awed and philosophical. "And a storm. And something else I don't have a category for. My father's gift. Both of them. Both." Another pause. "You were raised by gods." "Yes. That explains a number of things I was wondering about." The hat seemed to collect itself. "Now then. Where to put you? You have the courage, frankly, you have courage the way mountains have altitude. It's not a character trait so much as a geological feature. Ravenclaw would suit the mind, but the mind isn't what defines you. Slytherin would welcome the ambition, but ambition isn't what drives you. Hufflepuff would honor the loyalty, which is genuine, but it's not the organizing principle." "And Gryffindor?" Harry asked. "Gryffindor," the hat said, with the tone of something that has arrived at the answer it was always going to arrive at and is merely confirming it, "is the one that fits the way you carry yourself. Not just courage. The specific kind of courage that steps into a difficult situation not because it has to but because it saw something worth stepping toward." A pause. "You saw that girl in Diagon Alley." "I did." "You'll do a great deal of that at this school." "Probably," Harry agreed. "Then it had better be, Gryffindor." The last word was shouted aloud, the hat's brim snapping open. The Gryffindor table erupted. The noise was sudden and enormous and genuine, the particular roar of a house welcoming someone it had been waiting for, which was distinct from ordinary applause in a way that Harry felt physically. He stood, took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, and walked to the Gryffindor table. The noise from the other tables was considerable too. He sat between Hermione and Ron, who both looked simultaneously pleased and slightly dazed, and looked up to find Dumbledore watching him from the staff table with those blue eyes. Dumbledore smiled, a warm, genuine smile that nonetheless had the quality of a man who is thinking several things at once and expressing only the outermost. Harry smiled back. The sorting continued. He looked at his plate. Above him, at the staff table, he was aware of Quirrell not looking at him, which was a different kind of attention than looking. The feast was extraordinary. The tables filled with everything simultaneously, roasts and pies and vegetables and breads appearing fully formed from nothing, the kitchens below expressing themselves through the magic of house-elf labor with a thoroughness that suggested institutional pride. Harry ate without the self-consciousness of the kids around him who were visibly wondering if it was acceptable to take a second serving of everything, because Poseidon had long since established that food was one of the genuine pleasures and should be treated accordingly. He talked to Ron about Quidditch and found himself genuinely engaged, the geometry of it, the way weather conditions would interact with the strategies, the aerodynamic specifics of different broom models. He talked to Hermione about the sealing enchantment and whether the spell was updated in real time or ran on a predictive algorithm, which was a question she had also already been thinking about and which produced a rapid, spirited 20-minute conversation that Ron listened to with the expression of someone at a tennis match who enjoys sport but would have preferred a different sport. Neville, across the table, was attempting to get his toad to sit still with mixed results. Harry asked him the toad's name. "Trevor," Neville said, somewhat despairingly. Harry told him that Trevor seemed like a toad of firm independent convictions, which was a respectable quality in an animal. Neville looked at him with an expression of such surprised gratitude that Harry noted it and made a decision about Neville Longbottom that he would act on over the course of the following weeks. A boy down the table with silver blonde hair was watching Harry with barely concealed calculating interest. Harry met his eyes once, held them for a moment in a way that was not hostile but was entirely clear about the terms of the engagement, and the boy, Draco Malfoy, who had apparently been sorted into Slytherin with approximately 0 seconds of hat deliberation, looked away first. After the feast, Dumbledore stood and the hall went quiet with the ease of long habit. He was impressive, Harry had to concede. Not in the way that Zeus was impressive. Zeus announced himself to the entire available atmosphere and let the weather confirm the announcement. Dumbledore's impressiveness was quieter, more human, the impressiveness of a person who has gathered an enormous amount of power and wisdom into themselves over a long life and wears it without advertising it. There was genuine warmth in him, and genuine intelligence, and the particular quality of a man who loves people, which was both completely true and entirely compatible with being willing to sacrifice specific ones for a larger purpose. The speech covered the usual territory: welcome, rules, the forbidden forest, the third-floor corridor which was strictly out of bounds and definitely not suspicious, thank you Dumbledore, and ended with the school song, which Hogwarts apparently sang to its own tune and produced an effect of several hundred people in various keys finishing at various times that was chaotic in a way that felt traditional rather than accidental. As the hall began to disperse, Harry kept his eyes on the staff table. Quirrell left quickly, which was interesting. Snape stayed and spoke to McGonagall and then looked up once at Harry with those layered eyes before departing. Dumbledore remained, talking to the deputy headmistress, but his attention had the quality of something that was divided, one layer on the conversation, one layer elsewhere. On him. Assessing. Building a new model out of unfamiliar material. Harry followed the Gryffindor prefects toward the exit and felt the castle close around him like a hand, warm and old and aware, and thought again that he had been right about Hogwarts. It was not merely a building. It was something that had been loved into consciousness, and it had noticed him back. He was glad of it. The first week of classes was an exercise in Harry calibrating the distance between what Hogwarts thought it was teaching and what the classes actually contained. Transfiguration was the first morning. McGonagall transformed her desk into a pig and back with the crisp efficiency of a demonstration designed to establish credentials. Harry watched the spell, felt the shape of it, the way it redirected the fundamental nature of an object through concentrated magical intention, and understood the principle in the way he understood weather systems, as a matter of structural logic rather than memorized formula. They were set to turn a match into a needle. Harry's needle arrived on the first attempt, complete with the eye, which he'd added because it seemed more interesting. McGonagall looked at it, at him, and then at the match in its original state that he'd left beside it for comparison. Full marks, she said. Then, in a lower register that was not quite private, you've studied this. I've studied most things, Harry said pleasantly. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he was beginning to recognize as the McGonagall version of reassessment. I've taught for 38 years, Mr. Potter. I can count on one hand the number of students who produced a complete needle with eye on first attempt. A pause. The last one was your mother. The needle in Harry's palm caught the light. He looked at it for a moment, small, silver, made from something ordinary transformed into something with purpose. She was gifted, he said. Exceptionally, McGonagall agreed, and there was something in her voice that was genuine grief, worn smooth by years but still present in the grain. Charms with Flitwick was a delight. The tiny professor had an enthusiasm for the subject that was completely unperformed and entirely infectious, and his genuine astonishment at Harry's instinctive understanding of Wingardium Leviosa produced a reaction so enthusiastic that he nearly fell off his pile of books. Harry caught him with a small application of air pressure before the tumble happened, which was technically not a spell but produced the desired outcome, and which Flitwick looked at very carefully for 3 seconds before deciding to be charmed rather than confused. Herbology in the greenhouses was practical and earthy, and Professor Sprout had the quality Harry most respected in teachers: she assumed competence until shown otherwise rather than assuming incompetence until proven wrong. She talked to her plants the way Harry talked to storms, with the ease of long acquaintance, and Harry found it immediately familiar. Potions, which he had been curious about, delivered the most interesting morning of the week. Snape entered the dungeon classroom as though arriving at a location where he had already decided several things about the available company, and began speaking about potions with a genuine technical passion that was largely camouflaged by the deliberate intimidation of his delivery but was nonetheless visible to anyone paying the right kind of attention. Then he started on the questions. Potter. The black eyes came up from the register. The classroom went still in that specific way of students who recognize the energy of something pointed. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked at him evenly. Draught of living death. Asphodel belongs to the lily family and has strong somnolent properties. The combination with wormwood's bitterness produces a sedative of extraordinary potency. Originally documented by Aldrich the brewer in the 14th century, though the modern refinement is Damocles Belby's work. Snape's expression did not change. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? The stomach of a goat. Though the quality varies significantly by diet, a mountain goat's bezoar has stronger antidotal properties than a lowland goat's. The variation was quantified by Miriam Strout in 1974. A pause. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Snape asked, in the tone of a man who has prepared 3 questions in increasing order of difficulty and is encountering a problem with the sequencing. None. They're the same plant. Aconitum napellus. Also called aconite. The name variation is regional, monkshood in Britain, wolfsbane in most of Europe. Both are poisonous and both have applications in more advanced potions work, including the wolfsbane potion for werewolf treatment, which wasn't successfully refined until your generation. Harry paused. Your generation of potioneers, I mean. The dungeons were completely silent. Snape looked at him with those layered eyes and Harry looked back without performance, without challenge, simply present and clear and waiting. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, in the tone of a man who has been forced to say something by the rigid logic of his own professional standards and is noting this privately as an unusual event. Then, though I would caution against assuming that book knowledge and practical capability are the same thing, Mr. Potter. I wouldn't assume that, Harry said. One of my fathers is a craftsman. The class blinked. Snape looked at him for a beat longer than the pause required. Your father's, he said, carefully. Yes. Harry said it simply, evenly, leaving the plural to sit there and be whatever it was. The rest of the lesson passed in the charged quiet of a room that had registered something significant and was still processing it. Ron, beside Harry, was stirring his potion with the dedicated concentration of someone who has decided to keep his head down. Hermione, across the table, was alternating between her own perfect potion and looking at Harry with an expression that meant she had identified at least 3 questions she intended to ask later. Snape circulated. He stopped at Harry's station, looked at the potion, clear as described, precisely the right color, the surface showing the faint iridescent quality that indicated proper temperature maintenance, and moved on without comment, which from Snape, Harry was already learning, constituted high praise. Defense against the dark arts was the last class of the first week, and it was also, by some margin, the strangest. Quirrell's classroom smelled of garlic, aggressively and specifically, in the way of something deployed rather than cooked. The man himself stood at the front with the slightly distracted air of someone listening to 2 conversations, and he taught, or attempted to teach, about vampires with the erratic energy of a person who has prepared a lesson but is being interrupted in the preparation of it by something only he could hear. Harry sat in the middle of the class and paid very close attention to everything except the vampires. The turban. The heat that Quirrell radiated, not body heat, something else, something with the quality of a wrong note in a familiar piece of music. The way his eyes occasionally went momentarily blank and then refocused, like a screen with brief signal interruption. The specific positioning he maintained relative to Harry, always angled slightly away, never straight on, the way you didn't face a fire directly when the fire was too hot. Harry thought about the warmth in the mirror of a recent story he'd read, about objects that attracted dark attention. About the stone, presumably now somewhere in this castle, presumably guarded by something Dumbledore considered sufficient. He thought about what a disembodied Dark Lord needed, and how long 10 years was to wait, and how desperate the mathematics of that situation became. He looked at Quirrell and Quirrell did not look back. After class, Ron fell into step beside him in the corridor. Bit of a nutter, isn't he? Ron said, with the cheerful charity of someone who can afford to be charitable because nothing in the class had felt directly aimed at him. The garlic thing alone, Ron. Harry kept his voice conversational. The garlic. What's it traditionally supposed to ward off? Vampires. He was talking about, Ron stopped. His expression shifted through something quick and complex. "Oh," he said. "And the turban. Why a turban?" Ron looked at him. You're not saying there's something under." "I'm not saying anything," Harry said. "I'm asking questions." "That's worse," Ron said, after a moment. "Yes," Harry agreed. "It usually is." They walked down the corridor toward the stairs, and Harry let the question sit between them without pressing it further, because he had learned from both his fathers that the most important thing about knowledge was not acquiring it but knowing what to do with it once you had it. He did not have enough yet. He needed more. The castle was warm around him, the stones breathing with the slow rhythm of old awareness, and as Harry passed the third-floor corridor on the way to the tower staircase he paused for just a moment, eyes on the door at the far end, feeling the specific quality of the magic behind it, layered, deliberate, multiple casters, the signature of something arranged carefully by a very good wizard. It was substantial. He respected it. He also already knew it wasn't enough. Saturday morning, Harry went to the library. Not for the school reading, which he was doing in parallel without much difficulty. He went to the restricted section, which was cordoned off behind a thin rope and a small sign, which was not so much a security measure as an honor system, and which suggested that Hogwarts relied on its students' obedience more than it relied on actual barriers. He stepped over the rope. The restricted books were older, denser, the magic in them not aggressive but pressurized, the way deep water was pressurized, not because it wanted to be but because depth accumulated weight. He moved along the shelves, not pulling anything, just reading spines, feeling the quality of what was contained. The darkest magics and their countermeasures. Secrets of the darkest art. Magic most evil. He stopped at magic most evil. Pulled it from the shelf. Read the index. Horcruxes, see chapter 16. He turned to chapter 16 and read 3 paragraphs, which was all there was before the chapter ended and the remainder appeared to have been removed, carefully, deliberately, the edges of the pages too clean for ordinary wear. Someone had cut the pages out. Deliberately and some time ago. He read the 3 paragraphs he had. Then he put the book back, stepped over the rope, and went to find a quieter corner. He sat with a blank piece of parchment in front of him and thought, in the structured way Poseidon had taught him to think about complex systems, starting from established facts, building outward, not allowing assumption to present itself as established fact. Voldemort survived the killing curse's rebound. The curse should have been fatal. The love magic of Lily Potter's sacrifice explains the curse's failure, it explains the scar, the transference, Voldemort's incomplete destruction. But incomplete destruction means survival. 10 years of survival in a bodiless state means anchoring. Anchoring means, he stopped writing. Looked at what he'd written. Oh, he thought, with the same quality the Sorting Hat had used. Oh, that's what it is. Not one. The 3 paragraphs had mentioned a threshold, a soul fragmented past a certain point, beyond one, the personality becoming unstable, the magic becoming, he thought about the prophecy. The power the Dark Lord knows not. He thought about what a man who had fragmented his soul to avoid death would find incomprehensible in someone else. Not combat power. Not magical ability. Not divine heritage. Wholeness. He sat with that for a long moment in the quiet of the library, the castle breathing around him, Lyra sleeping somewhere in the Olary above. Then he picked up his quill and wrote a letter to Poseidon, because he had told Zeus he would ask when something required divine attention, and this was the kind of information that deserved to be shared with people who had a stake in the outcome. He also wrote a second letter, shorter, to Zeus. Something is moving. The structure of it is larger than it appeared from the outside. I have some of it but not all. I'm going to need the year to gather the rest. Don't intervene, I want to understand it fully before it moves. But stay close. He sealed both letters, took them to the Olary, and watched Lyra take them into the clouded Scottish sky with the composed authority of a bird who found this sort of thing well within her remit. Then he stood at the Olary window and looked out at the grounds, the lake gleaming steel gray, the forbidden forest dark at the edges of the grass, the Quidditch pitch in the middle distance, the sky pressing low with autumn cloud. He thought about Lily Potter's love, structured into the scar on his forehead, warm against his skin. He thought about wholeness as a power. About what it meant to be full rather than fragmented, to love people, to be loved by gods, to walk into a room without armor because you had never needed any. He thought about a dark lord who had spent 50 years making himself less in exchange for longer. Right, Harry said, to the grey Scottish sky, to the castle at his back, to everything ahead of him. Let's do this properly. He turned from the window, went back down the stairs, and walked out toward the lake, where the giant squid was doing something languorous and enormous under the surface of the steel-grey water. He sat on the bank and took off his shoes and put his feet in the water, which was cold enough to bite. The squid surfaced briefly near his feet, regarded him with one enormous amber eye, and then sank again. "Hello," Harry said. The water moved with a slow, comfortable acknowledgement. He sat there until dinner and thought about everything, Quirrell's turban and the stone and the Horcrux pages and the shape of the year ahead, and the castle behind him held its warmth steadily, like something keeping a promise. Chapter 4, What Sleeps Beneath October arrived in Scotland like an argument, cold and insistent, the kind of weather that had opinions about whether you dressed appropriately. The castle responded by rearranging some of its staircases toward warmer corridors and keeping the fires higher than strictly necessary, small adjustments that Harry noticed and appreciated as the gesture they were. He had settled into Hogwarts the way water settles into a landscape, finding the natural channels, the places where things moved and collected. He knew the castle's rhythms now. Which staircases changed on Thursdays? Which suits of armor liked to comment on passing students? Which portraits were worth talking to and which ones simply performed their original subjects without much of the person remaining? He had found 3 passages in the first week that didn't appear in any map he'd located, and 2 rooms that seemed to exist only when the castle decided they were needed. He had also been watching Quirrell with the patience of something that had learned from the sea that you didn't rush what needed time to fully reveal itself. The defense professor was deteriorating in a way that was not dramatic but was consistent. A slight increase in the tremor of his hands. The blank screen moments happening more frequently, sometimes in the middle of sentences. He had begun wearing gloves, which was odd given the classroom's warmth, and he positioned himself increasingly in relation to Harry, across corridors, half-turned in the great hall, with the avoidance of something that felt a warning Harry was too close to something and was working to maintain distance. Harry let him maintain it. For now. Ron had noticed something was wrong with Quirrell around the 3rd week of October, because Ron had the kind of instinctive social intelligence that was less analytical than Harry's but sometimes faster, the ability to feel the weather in a room before cataloging its components. He had said, during a Wednesday evening chess game in the common room, that Quirrell looked like a man who wasn't sleeping, which was true and also understated the situation considerably. Harry was winning the chess game, which required real effort, because Ron played chess the way Ares fought, with an aggression that was strategic rather than reckless, a constant forward pressure that tried to make you react rather than initiate. "Your queen is going to take my bishop," Harry said. "I know," Ron said. "And then you'll have my rook." "I know. And then I'll have your king in 4 moves." Ron looked at the board. Looked at it for a while. "That's not, how are you?" He traced the lines of it, and Harry watched him work through it, the progression visible on his face. Then, "Oh, that's not fair." "It's completely fair. It's chess. It's you at chess, which is a different thing." Ron sat back and crossed his arms in the manner of someone who has lost with his dignity intact and intends to keep it that way. "Did you grow up playing this?" "I grew up playing with gods. The god of strategy occasionally." Ron looked at him. This was still happening, these moments where Harry said something entirely matter-of-fact that recalibrated the room. Ron was better at it now than he'd been in September. He absorbed it the way he absorbed most things, practically, filing it in the folder labeled "Harry is not entirely like other people, we have accepted this and moving forward." "The god of strategy," Ron repeated. "Athena. Gray eyes, owl. That one. That one. And you played chess with her. She prefers Go, actually. But she'll play chess. She doesn't lose at either. Ron looked at the board where Harry had just demonstrated his own considerable capability. Did she let you? She did not let me win, Harry said. I haven't beaten her yet. That's not the point. The point is watching how she thinks. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, why hasn't she beaten you yet? If she's the goddess of strategy, Harry looked at him. Because I don't think the same way she does. She optimizes. I improvise. It's harder to model something that isn't following the logical progression. He moved his knight. It's how I beat Ares too. Ares. God of War. Ron took a breath. You beat the god of war. Once. He was annoyed about it for weeks. I bet Ron stopped. His expression shifted into something that was the question he'd been not quite asking since September. Harry. Can I ask something and you won't get weird about it? I won't get weird about it. How are you? What are you, exactly? You're not a god, you're here, you're at Hogwarts in our year. But you grew up with, I'm human, Harry said. It was simple and steady. Fully. My parents were James and Lily Potter, both human wizards. I was taken in by Zeus and Poseidon when I was 1 year old. They raised me. They taught me things. He paused. The power is mine, their teaching opened it, but it was always mine. I'm not a demigod. I'm not divine. I'm a wizard who grew up in the deep ocean and in lightning storms and in the libraries of Olympus. Ron absorbed this. He started, and then abandoned that sentence and tried another. That's actually more interesting than if you were a god. I think so too. Because a god being better at everything is that's just what gods are. But you're human, Harry said. Yes. Entirely. Ron looked at the chessboard and the position of his king in approximately 4 moves' time, and something settled in his face into a kind of comprehension that went beyond chess. Yeah, he said. All right. He reached out and knocked his own king over. Rematch tomorrow. Obviously, Harry said. Hermione found the Horcrux connection on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of October. She did not come to this conclusion through the same route Harry had. She had no access to the restricted section page he'd read, and she had not made the same structural leap from the 3 available paragraphs. She arrived there from a different direction entirely, through the wizarding law texts in the regular library section, specifically through a subsection of inheritance law that covered what happened to magical objects when a creator's death was incomplete. She put the book in front of Harry in the library at 7 in the evening with the expression of someone who has found a thing they weren't looking for and is not entirely sure how to feel about it. Look at this, she said. He read where she was pointing. Sections of wizarding inheritance law reference the handling of objects with split soul attachment in cases of the creators. The text used the word severance rather than death, which was its own kind of interesting, incomplete severance. The references were dry and legal and clearly written by someone trying to discuss the topic without getting too close to it, but the implications were clear enough. You've been thinking about this too, Hermione said. It was not a question. Since the 3rd week of term. She sat down across from him with the specific energy of someone who has been carrying a piece of information alone for too long and has found someone safe to put it down with. You know who didn't just survive. He prepared for survival. In advance. Which means, the power Dumbledore thinks is keeping him from returning isn't just the love magic. It's that he has. She stopped. Looked around the library. Leaned forward. Lowered her voice. Multiple points of anchoring. Yes. How many? I don't know yet. More than one. The 3 paragraphs I read in the restricted section suggested the process was used more than once, which given the level of magical instability involved, explains why 10 years of attempts to return have produced someone who can barely maintain cohesive will through a borrowed body. Hermione looked at him steadily. You've been managing this information alone for 3 weeks. I've sent letters to my fathers. That's not the same as talking about it. No, Harry said. It's not. He looked at her. What do you think we should do? She sat with this question for a moment with the concentrated seriousness that she gave to every real question. We need more information before we decide anything. The stone is here, in the castle, presumably past the 3rd floor corridor. Quirrell is compromised. Dumbledore knows about Quirrell or he doesn't, and either option is its own category of problem. She paused. If Dumbledore knows, he's using Quirrell as a lure, which means the stone is bait, which means there's a trap involved and we need to know if we're part of it. Harry looked at her across the library table. Go on. And if Dumbledore doesn't know, then we have a significant problem and a headmaster who needs to be told, but who? She stopped again. The brown eyes were very direct. Hagrid said something to me, actually, in the first week. When you weren't there. He said you weren't what Dumbledore expected. He said it like it was a good thing but also like it complicated things. Another pause. Dumbledore made a plan around a different version of you. Yes. So telling him about Quirrell means entering his orbit. Letting him start managing the situation. Which means letting him start managing you. Also yes. Hermione folded her hands on the table. Then we gather information until we have enough to act independently. Without needing his framework. Harry looked at her for a long moment. In the castle's library, with the evening pressing against the windows and the candles doing their quiet work and the books breathing around them, she looked like exactly what she was, brilliant and principled and entirely unafraid of the shape of what she just proposed, which was the two of them deciding to operate outside the architecture of Dumbledore's plan. Good, Harry said. Ron should know, Hermione added. He'll want to know. And she paused, choosing the word. He's very good in unexpected situations. He is, Harry agreed. Tell him tonight. You're not going to, you found the second piece. You should tell him. She looked at him briefly with the expression she got when he did something that didn't fit her existing categories and she was updating. Then she gathered her books and stood. Harry. She stopped at the edge of the table. How bad is it, really? The Horcrux situation. Harry considered the honest answer, which was that it was quite a lot worse than most people understood and would require significantly more than one good year to fully resolve, and decided that honesty here was more respectful than comfort. It's a several-year problem, he said. This year has a smaller scope than the full problem. This year is about keeping the stone away from whatever's using Quirrell. And the larger problem? We'll get to it, he said. When we know enough. She held his gaze for one more moment and then nodded once, with the decisive economy of a general accepting a revised operational timeline. She left. Harry looked at his books and did not read them for a while. The troll arrived on Halloween. It was a mountain troll, 12 feet of grey muscle and bad decision-making, and it had gotten into the school through the dungeon entrance, which suggested it had been let in rather than wandered in, because mountain trolls did not navigate door mechanisms with any efficiency. Harry knew this because he had, at 9 years old, spent 3 weeks in the company of 2 Norwegian mountain trolls who had become involved in a territorial dispute with a sea giant near Bergen, which Poseidon had asked him to mediate as an exercise in negotiation. The trolls had been enormous and fragrant and ultimately reasonable once you understood that their decision-making process operated on a longer timescale than most negotiations assumed. This one was in the second-floor bathroom, which was how Harry found it, following the screaming, which was Hermione's, which was the specific high register of someone who has encountered something much larger than anticipated in a small room. He arrived at the bathroom door 4 seconds before Ron, who had also followed the screaming, and about 40 seconds before the professors, who were organizing a systematic search from the Great Hall. The troll was in the bathroom. Hermione was backed against the far wall, which was wet because the troll had already destroyed the sinks and the pipes were enthusiastically contributing to the situation. The troll had a large wooden club which it was deploying against the plumbing with a consistent rhythm that suggested methodology rather than rage. It was trying to collapse the wall behind which Hermione was standing, working at it systematically with the patience of something very large that has decided it has time. Ron came in behind Harry, saw the troll, and said something that was an admirably honest assessment of the situation. The troll turned toward the door. It was tall enough that its head almost reached the ceiling, and it had the small red eyes of something that navigated by smell and sound rather than vision. It smelled them, both of them, and recalibrated from wall to nearer targets with the pragmatic efficiency of a creature that understood opportunity. Ron raised his wand. Harry put a hand on his arm. "I've got it," Harry said. The troll charged. It was not fast, a 12-foot mountain troll was not built for speed, but it had the momentum of something very large that was moving with intent, and the bathroom was small enough that the distance problem was solved before the speed problem became relevant. Harry stepped to the side at the last possible moment. Not a jump, not a dramatic dodge, a single precise step that took him out of the troll's direct line by about 8 inches, which was exactly the required amount. The troll went past him into the wall, which cracked comprehensively under the impact. The troll staggered, which was expected, and began to turn, which was also expected. The bracelet on Harry's wrist was hot. He looked at the troll, at its size, its construction, the specific vulnerability points of a mountain troll which he knew from both reading and experience, and did something that Ron would later describe, with some difficulty, as, it was like the air got heavy and then the troll just stopped. What Harry actually did was considerably more specific than that. Mountain trolls had vestigial magical sensitivity, not enough to use magic but enough to register it, enough to respond to a significant magical pressure the way large animals responded to subsonic sound, below the threshold of conscious processing but above the threshold of physical response. He had read this in a Care of Magical Creatures text that the Hogwarts syllabus didn't cover until 5th year, and confirmed it empirically in Norway at age 9. He concentrated the air pressure in the room at a specific frequency and directed it. The troll went extremely still. Its small red eyes found Harry and stayed there, blinking once, slowly, with the expression of a creature that has encountered something its instincts are telling it is categorically above its weight class and is waiting for further instruction from those instincts. Harry looked at it. "Out," he said. It was one word. Not loud. Not theatrical. The troll turned around, moved to the door, and left the bathroom. Its footsteps receded down the corridor. There was a distant crash as it apparently encountered a wall during the navigational complexity of the corridor junction, and then the footsteps resumed, and then there was another crash, further away, and then silence. The bathroom dripped. Hermione had come away from the wall and was standing in the center of the flooded floor, looking at the door through which the troll had just walked under its own power, and then at Harry, and then at the door again. Ron said the same thing he'd said when the troll first came in. "Hermione," Harry said. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice was perfectly level, which was not the same as her being perfectly level, but she was doing the work to get there. "No, no." "What did you do?" "Pressure differential. Mountain trolls have, I know what mountain trolls have. I've read Scamander. I didn't know you could produce that kind of, Harry, that wasn't a spell." "No. That was," she stopped. "Started again. That was something else." "Yes." Ron looked between them with the expression of a man who had just watched something that substantially revised his previously revised understanding of the situation. "Right," he said. "Yeah. Okay. That's," he appeared to take stock of himself. "Are we talking about this now or later?" "Later," Harry said. "The professors are going to arrive in about 30 seconds. They arrived in 25. McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell, Snape with his wand out and the evaluating readiness of a man who has arrived expecting a problem, McGonagall with the expression of someone whose professional competence is currently warring with her relief at finding all three of them intact, and Quirrell at the back, slightly further back than the others, turban tilted at the angle that suggested the inner argument was louder than usual. Snape's eyes swept the bathroom. The destroyed sinks, the flooded floor, the crack in the wall where the troll had impacted it, the 3 first years standing in the middle of it unhurt. Then they found Harry and stayed there for 3 seconds longer than a routine assessment required. The troll left, Harry said, before anyone asked. Down the corridor. Probably the north staircase by now. Left, McGonagall repeated. Yes. Another pause. Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger, McGonagall said, in the voice of a professor who has decided to address the manageable part of a situation before confronting the unmanageable part. Are you injured? No, Professor, Hermione said. We're fine, Ron confirmed. McGonagall looked at Harry. Whatever she was going to say, she appeared to reconsider it. Instead, 10 points to Gryffindor. Each. She looked at the wall. And we will discuss the particulars of this evening at a time when the corridor does not have a troll in it. Quirrell had not looked at Harry once since entering the bathroom. He was looking at the far wall, specifically at the crack, with the specific avoidance of something that could not look directly at a source of heat. Harry looked at him once, directly. Quirrell's head turned very slightly away. Right, Harry thought. So that's interesting. The Quidditch season opened in November with Gryffindor vs Slytherin. Harry had made the team in the second week of October in a trial that the captain, Oliver Wood, had been so overwhelmed by that he'd had to sit down for a moment before formally announcing the result. Harry had not been attempting to impress anyone, he had been flying the way he moved through weather systems, naturally, with the ease of something doing what it was designed for. He had caught the snitch 4 times in a 1-hour trial, twice from behind without looking, and once, in a moment that Wood would be telling people about for years, while performing a Wronski feint that he had invented on the spot and that Wood was still trying to describe in terms his team could replicate. He rode a Nimbus 2000, which was the best school broom available, and he treated it with the respect owed to a good tool while being entirely clear that the broom was transportation and the flying was him. The broom followed rather than led. The morning of the Slytherin match was cold and iron grey, the kind of sky that promised rain but hadn't committed to it yet. Harry dressed with the easy practicality of someone who had flown in actual storms and found professional Quidditch weather thoroughly manageable. The stands were packed, the whole school, and the noise of it was a wall of sound as they flew onto the pitch. Harry rolled his neck, felt the air, checked the wind direction from the movement of the banners, and took his position. Wood gave the customary captain's speech, which Harry listened to with respect because Wood meant every word of it, even the slightly excessive parts. Then the whistle, and the balls in the air, and the game. The first 10 minutes were ordinary by any standard except his, which was to say that 2 chasers were fouled, 1 bludger nearly took Slytherin's keeper's head off, and Marcus Flint attempted 3 things that were technically against the rules in 2 different rule systems. Harry tracked the snitch in his peripheral vision from the moment it was released, noted its initial trajectory, calculated its likely path based on the wind and the disturbance patterns of the other players' brooms, and used the first 10 minutes to let it establish a habit. Then his broom lurched. Not a mechanical failure, the Nimbus didn't have mechanical failures, or not this kind, the specific seizure-like jerking that had no physical cause, a broom that was trying to go several directions simultaneously, fighting itself. Harry gripped the handle with both hands and felt it, the external magical interference, the specificity of the jinx, the focus of it. He kept himself on the broom through will and physical strength, which were both considerable, and spent 30 seconds locating the source. He could not turn to look directly, but his peripheral vision, trained by a decade of watching the sea for specific current patterns, found it. The stands. Staff section. Quirrell, lips moving. Harry looked at Hermione on the ground below and caught her eye and directed his attention toward the staff section with a small movement. She followed his look. He saw her process it, look at Quirrell, and then, because Hermione, act immediately, moving through the crowd toward the professors with the targeted efficiency of a person who had already decided what to do. In the 30 seconds between her moving and the jinx breaking, Harry focused on staying on the broom. This was, if he was honest, less difficult than it would have been for anyone else on the team, because he had spent 3 years being taught by Poseidon that maintaining position under conflicting forces was a fundamental skill, and had practiced it in conditions that made a jinxed nimbus seem like mild turbulence. He didn't panic. He didn't overcorrect. He rode the interference the way you rode a cross-current, working with the parts that weren't actively trying to eject him, staying centered, waiting. When Hermione reached Quirrell and the jinx broke, Harry had exactly 2 seconds of clean flight to register the snitch's position, 20 feet below him, to the east, hovering near the Slytherin goalposts with the characteristic inquisitive pause of a snitch that had run out of open air to move into. He went into a dive that cleared the pitch in 3 seconds. He took the snitch at the bottom of the arc 4 feet from the ground, the crowd going from noise to something beyond noise, a physical force, and pulled up level so smoothly that the grass barely moved below him. He opened his fist and showed the snitch to the referee, who confirmed it with slightly more enthusiasm than was technically professional. Gryffindor won by 220 points. In the aftermath, the team landing, would performing the physical expression of a man whose dreams had materialized, Harry found Ron and Hermione in the crowd. Hermione's robes smelled faintly of smoke. There was a small fire, she said, preemptively. In Quirrell's robes. By accident. Ron was making the face of a person trying not to laugh while understanding that laughing was not appropriate. He knocked over something flammable, Hermione added, with the precision of someone selecting the technically accurate option. Running away from the fire was his own decision. Harry looked at her. You set a professor on fire. There was a fire in the vicinity of a professor, Hermione said. Ron lost the battle with the laugh. It was short and quickly suppressed but completely genuine. He broke the jinx, Harry said. Yes. Good. Harry looked at the pitch, then at the snitch still in his fist, then at the two of them, Ron still recovering, Hermione watching him with the combination of concern and calculation that was becoming her default expression in his company. Thank you, he said. Hermione looked at him for a moment and seemed to decide that the magnitude of the situation warranted a departure from her usual precision. Don't fall off your broom again, she said. It was extremely stressful. I wasn't going to fall, Harry said. You don't know that. I do, actually. She made the face that meant she was updating her model again and found the new version simultaneously more reassuring and more frustrating than the previous one. November deepened. The stone corridors breathed cold and the fires in the common room burned higher, and Harry spent his evenings between chess games and reading and conversations that were teaching him things that no divine library had ever contained, which was the specific texture of what it was like to be 11 and human and in a school in Scotland with friends. He had not had friends before. He had had companions, divine, in the main, which was different. Gods were brilliant and complex and Harry had loved them truly, but they existed on a timescale that made urgency a different thing, a different quality. Ron and Hermione were urgent in the way that humans were urgent, present, immediate, the stakes of their feelings real in real time. He found he valued it more than he had anticipated. Neville had begun sitting with them regularly. Harry had made a point of it in October, after noticing the way Neville moved through the school, watchful, braced, with the specific posture of someone who had learned to make himself small in anticipation of being targeted. He was not incompetent, which was how most people treated him. He was unconfident, which was different, and the difference mattered because competence could be accessed when confidence was restored. Harry had started asking Neville questions in herbology, specifically the questions Harry already knew the answers to, which let Neville answer correctly, which began the slow architectural work of showing Neville his own capability from the inside. He had watched this process used by Poseidon on sea creatures who had been frightened into defensive patterns and knew it took time and consistency and never condescension. By November, Neville was answering questions in herbology without being asked. Sprout noticed and gave him a look of warm approval that Harry received with the equanimity of someone not particularly interested in credit. December announced itself with the first snow, which arrived overnight and turned the grounds into the specific white silence of a landscape making its most legible gesture. Harry stood at the dormitory window in the early morning and watched it and felt the quality of the storm that had deposited it, a natural storm, unguided, the kind that knew what it was doing without anyone's input. He missed the mountain sometimes. He missed the sea more. He picked up his quill and wrote to Poseidon about the snow, which was not the kind of information the god of the sea strictly needed, but Poseidon had been sending him letters about various Atlantic current patterns with a detail that exceeded any practical relevance to Harry's current situation, so Harry felt the exchange was equitable. The response arrived the next morning with Lyra, who carried 2 letters and the expression of a bird who had been flying all night and expected recognition of this fact. Poseidon's letter was 4 pages about the North Sea winter conditions and, in the last paragraph, 3 sentences that contained everything important. I know what you found in the library. Zeus does too. We are watching. You have what you need, use it when you need it and not before. Zeus's letter was significantly shorter, the turban. Don't trust the turban. Also well done on the Quidditch. Harry looked at the letter and felt warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He folded both, tucked them inside his copy of the flannel book, and went down to breakfast. The great hall was full and warm and smelled of toast and the particular comfort of a communal morning, and Ron was already there with a plate that suggested he had been awake long enough to be significantly hungry, and Hermione arrived 2 minutes later with 3 books and the energy of someone who had been in the library at 7 and considered this a normal Saturday morning activity. Harry sat down between them and the morning happened around him the way mornings did when you were in the right place for them, and for a little while the stone and Quirrell and the Horcrux problem and the shape of the year ahead were simply information, present, noted, filed, and everything else was just breakfast. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in the second week of December, in the 3rd floor corridor. Harry had not planned it. He had been on his way back from the library and had taken a different route because the main staircase was occupied by a peeve situation that would have added 15 minutes to the journey, and the alternative route ran along the 3rd floor corridor, and as he approached the door at the far end he felt it. Not the usual warmth of the castle around him. Something different, agitated, the quality of a protected space being probed from the other side. The multiple layers of Dumbledore's security, arranged in careful sequence, were under active pressure. He stopped. The corridor was empty. The door at the far end was closed. Behind it, through the stone and the spells and whatever physical guardians Dumbledore had arranged, something was testing the outer defenses with the methodical patience of something that had done it before. Harry stood in the corridor and thought about Quirrell, who had been absent from dinner. He walked to the door. Felt the spells on it, a locking charm, 2 layers of the same thing, both cast by the same hand. He could feel Dumbledore's magical signature in it the way you could hear a specific voice in a crowd. He touched the door once, and felt the architecture of the defenses behind it. The first guardian would be close to the door, the others deeper. He had not been planning to do this tonight. He also was not the kind of person to walk away from a situation because the timing wasn't perfect. He opened the door. The 3-headed dog on the other side was 9 feet at the shoulder, black as deep water, with 3 pairs of eyes and the specific intensity of a creature that had been bred for guarding and found meaning in it. Fluffy, a name that suggested Hagrid had named it, because no one else in this situation would have named a 9-foot 3-headed dog Fluffy, looked at Harry with all 6 eyes and produced a sound that was 3 growls happening in coordinated synchrony, which was louder than a single growl by something more than a factor of 3. Harry looked at it. Then he looked at the hatch in the floor beneath its feet, and the unconscious twitching in the dog's hindquarters, and the harp near the wall that was still settling into silence, strings vibrating with the dissipating resonance of recently completed music. He picked up the harp. He played 1 chord. He had learned music from Apollo, who had very strong opinions about music education, and while Harry had not become a musician in any dedicated sense, he had developed a technical competency that was significantly above the level required to play a sleeping charm into a 3-headed dog. Fluffy's 6 eyes closed in sequence. The growling resolved into a snore that shook the dust from the ceiling in small cascades. Harry set the harp down, opened the hatch, and dropped through. He landed in a room full of Devil's Snare, which immediately began wrapping itself around him with the cheerful enthusiasm of a plant that had been waiting for something to do. He let it wrap for about 3 seconds, noting the speed and method, then produced a small, precise point of light in his palm, not lumos, something warmer, the low-end radiance that came from the same place as the storm cord, and the plant recoiled with the pained haste of something that had made a structural error. He walked through the Devil's Snare and through the next room, where a cloud of keys moved in formation above a locked door. He watched them for a moment and then, because he had spent considerable time learning to feel the shape of magical structures, found the one that was different, slightly different wing design, slightly different key cut, carrying the residual warmth of the specific lock it had been shaped for. He tracked it, took it out of the air without a broom, opened the door. The chess set next was magnificent and he had a genuine moment of appreciation for it, life-size, carved from black and white marble, the pieces moving with the autonomous intelligence of something enchanted with significant artistry. The board read as a mid-game position with intent, not randomly arranged. He studied it for 40 seconds. Then he moved the white queen's bishop to a square that no one playing either black or white would have played, a position that made no conventional sense, and watched the chess pieces freeze in the specific way of things encountering a move outside their decision tree. He walked through the frozen pieces to the other side. The troll room he walked through holding his breath, because whoever had arranged this sequence of challenges had correctly identified that a troll was a dangerous guardian for most people. For Harry it was less dangerous than the Devil's Snare had been. He was past it in 30 seconds. The potion room was elegant. 7 bottles, a riddle in verse on a strip of parchment, the specific logical structure of a puzzle built by someone who understood that intelligence was the best guard against most threats. He read the riddle, identified the progression logic, cross-referenced it with the temperature signatures of the bottles, selected the correct one, drank a mouthful, and went through the black fire. And into the final room, where Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror of Eriste with his back to the door, his robe slightly scorched at the hem in a way that suggested Hermione's accident in the Quidditch stands had left a lasting impression, his turban very still. Harry walked into the room and closed the door behind him with a click that Quirrell heard. Quirrell turned around. "Oh," he said, in a voice that was already not entirely his. "Harry Potter." Harry looked at him. At the faint shimmer at the edges of him, the doubled quality, the body occupied by a second consciousness, the specific signature of an unwilling host and a dominating passenger. "Hello, Professor," Harry said pleasantly. "How are you getting on?" Quirrell's face moved through a range of expressions that were not all his. When it had settled on something that was looking at Harry with eyes that had changed, darker, differently focused, the assessment of something very old and very patient looking at an 11-year-old boy and finding, visibly, something unexpected. "You are not what I was told you would be," the voice said. Quirrell's lips, but not Quirrell's cadence. "No," Harry agreed. "I imagine not. I was told a child. Isolated. Frightened." The voice had a quality like old paper, dry, thin, with an antiquity to it. Malleable. "That was always a specific choice of expectation," Harry said. "Not really based on evidence." The presence behind Quirrell's eyes assessed him for a long moment with the particular focus of a consciousness that had been patient for 10 years and was measuring the distance between its expectations and its current reality. "Where have you been?" it asked. "Somewhere better than a cupboard under the stairs," Harry said. A pause. "You feel different," Voldemort said, through Quirrell's mouth, with the tone of someone identifying something they don't have a category for. "What are you?" "I told you," Harry said. "I'm Harry Potter." He looked at the mirror of Eriste behind Quirrell. The mirror showed him, and what it showed was not the stone, not yet, because Harry had not yet stood in front of it with the intention of finding the stone. He was looking at Quirrell, not the mirror. But he could feel what was in it. The warmth of it. The mirror's particular awareness of desire and intention, the enchantment that Dumbledore had built into it for exactly this purpose, that only someone who wanted to find the stone rather than use it would receive it. He stepped to the side of Quirrell, so he could see the mirror directly. "Don't," Quirrell said, but Harry was already looking. The mirror showed him himself, standing exactly where he was standing. The stone materialized in his reflected hand. He felt it in his pocket. He looked from the mirror to Quirrell and found the dark eyes watching him with something that was beyond the scope of what Quirrell's face was built to express, older, more complex, the specific feeling of a thing that has just watched something happen that changes the available options. "Give it to me," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said. "You don't understand what it can do." "What I can, I know exactly what it does." Harry looked at him with the calm of something that doesn't need armor because it has never needed it. "It provides immortality through the elixir of life, which you already have, in a more durable if less elegant form. You don't need the stone. You're using it as an expedient because the durable form is uncomfortable." The room was very still. "You know," Voldemort said, and it was very quiet now, a whisper coming through a failing instrument, Quirrell's body at the edge of what it could sustain for this duration. "You know about the others." "I know about the others," Harry said. "Then you know I cannot be destroyed." "Not tonight," Harry agreed. "Not yet." He put his hand in his pocket and closed it around the stone. "But not by you having this, either. The stone stays with me. Quirrell goes to the hospital wing. He looked at the shimmer, the passenger, the thing that had once been Tom Riddle. "You leave." "And if Professor?" Harry's voice was gentle. It was not the gentleness of someone being cautious. It was the gentleness of someone who is entirely secure and is choosing it freely. "You killed my mother. You tried to kill me. You've been running from what that choice produced for 10 years. He looked at him steadily. "I'm not afraid of you. I want you to understand that clearly, because everything you plan to do from this point forward is going to be built on a misunderstanding if you think there is a version of me that can be intimidated." The shimmer behind Quirrell's eyes was very still. "What are you?" it asked again, softer. "The power you don't know," Harry said simply. And then he touched Quirrell's wrist, just his wrist, one hand, bare skin, and the contact produced what it produced, the specific catastrophic incompatibility of a love-saturated protection and the consciousness it had been protecting against, the scar blazing hot and the room filling with a shriek that was not sound but pressure and the shimmer tearing itself loose from Quirrell's body like smoke from a snuffed flame. Quirrell crumpled. Harry caught him. The shimmer dissolved into the room and was gone, and the only thing remaining was a professor who had been inhabited against his will and a boy holding him in an empty room with 7 increasingly redundant guardians above them and the mirror of Eriste reflecting nothing useful and the stone warm in Harry's pocket. Harry lowered Quirrell to the floor carefully, checked his pulse, confirmed he was alive and breathing, put his own outer robe under his head as a pillow, and then straightened up and looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back at him. The stone in his reflection's hand had not disappeared. He looked at it for a moment, not the stone specifically, but the image of himself holding it. Thought about Dumbledore, who had built this room, who had built this school year, who had engineered this specific configuration because he had expected a specific boy to reach this specific room in a specific state of need. Harry had not come here because Dumbledore's plan had brought him here. He had come here because Quirrell was in a professor's body and the stone needed to not be here anymore and Harry had the capability to do something about that, so he had done something about it. He took the stone from his pocket and held it up in the mirror's light. Ruby red, warm, the size of a large walnut, carrying in it the accumulated century of Flamel's work, a human life devoted to the alchemy of permanence. He held it and thought about permanence. About the desire for it that Voldemort had built an entire architecture of horror around. About the fragments of a soul scattered through objects as anchors against the tide of endings. About Lily Potter, who had not tried to live forever and had left a love that was more durable than anything Flamel had ever made. He closed his fist around the stone. Quirrell breathed steadily on the floor. The mirror reflected nothing now that Harry wasn't looking at it. The room was quiet and the castle above was warm, and Harry stood in the lowest chamber of Dumbledore's trap and felt, simply and clearly, that the trap had worked, just not the way Dumbledore had designed it. "Okay," Harry said, to no one in particular, to the castle that was listening, to the night ahead that was going to involve a conversation with Dumbledore that would be interesting in ways he was already partly prepared for. He picked up Quirrell, settled the man's weight across his shoulders, and carried him up through the chambers toward the world above. Chapter 5. The mirror shows only men. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that jumped aside for Harry without being given the password, which suggested either that the castle had already communicated what had happened below or that Dumbledore had anticipated the arrival and prepared accordingly. Harry suspected both. He had left Quirrell in the hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey, who had received the unconscious professor with the efficient gravity of someone whose professional life had trained her not to ask the loudest questions first. She had looked at Harry once, at the scar, at his expression, at the fact that he was 11 years old and carrying an adult, and then redirected her attention entirely to her patient. Harry had answered her 3 medical questions and left. The walk to Dumbledore's office was through the quiet late-night castle, the torches burning low, the portraits pretending to sleep. Harry walked at an even pace with the stone in his inner pocket and his mind doing the specific organized work of preparing for a conversation with someone who was very good at conversations. The office was circular and full of silver instruments making small industrious sounds, star charts on the walls, a large desk behind which Dumbledore was sitting when Harry arrived, apparently having been expecting him long enough to have prepared 2 cups of tea. The phoenix on the perch near the window watched Harry with one brilliant eye. Harry sat down in the chair across from the desk. He did not wait to be invited to sit. Dumbledore's expression acknowledged this without commenting on it. The headmaster looked older at this hour than he did in the daylight of the Great Hall, or perhaps it was simply that this was the hour when the architecture of dignity and presentation came down somewhat, and what remained was a man of considerable years who had been awake worrying. His eyes were still extraordinarily blue, still containing that layered attention, but there were things in them now that the daytime performance didn't include. Relief. And something more complicated than relief. "Harry," he said. "Headmaster," Harry said. A pause. One of those pauses that contains several conversations at once. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk with the tea steaming between them, and Harry could see him doing it, the reassessment, the recalibration, the revision of the model he'd been working from. It was slower and more thorough than Hermione's had been, and it was happening now because this was the first time Dumbledore had been in a room with Harry long enough that the performance of mutual pretense was not operationally convenient. "You retrieved the stone," Dumbledore said. "Yes." "And Quirinus is in the hospital wing." "Yes." "He's alive." "He'll need care, being an involuntary host for that long does significant damage to the nervous system. I'd suggest a specialist." "I will arrange it." Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. "And Lord Voldemort?" "Gone. Dispersed. Not destroyed, he has other anchors, as you know. But Quirrell's body can't sustain him anymore. He'll need to find another method." Harry paused. "That gives us time." "Not a lot, but some." The office was quiet. An instrument on the shelf behind Dumbledore produced a small chime and went still. "You know about the anchors," Dumbledore said. "Not quite a question. I found the reference in the restricted section. And I'm good at structural reasoning." Harry looked at him steadily. "You know about them too. You've known for some time, I think." Dumbledore did not confirm this immediately, which was its own confirmation. "How long," Harry said, "have you known that destroying Voldemort completely requires destroying each anchor individually?" The blue eyes were very steady. "Long enough," Dumbledore said, "that I have been building a plan around it." "A plan that required a specific boy," Harry said. "Raised in a specific way. In a specific state of manageable vulnerability." He said it without heat. Simply as the shape of the thing. "You needed someone who would be willing to be guided." Who would come to you rather than act independently? Who would walk into situations because you pointed them toward it, not because they chose it themselves? Dumbledore's expression did not change. This was, Harry thought, a kind of honesty, not conceding the point but not denying it. The plan had merit, Dumbledore said finally. It probably still does, Harry agreed. For a different person. He reached into his inner pocket and placed the stone on the desk between them. It sat in the lamplight, red and warm and unreasonably beautiful. The stone should go back to Nicholas. Or be destroyed, that's actually the better option, and I think Nicholas would agree if the question were put to him honestly and with the understanding that the alternative is this happening again. Dumbledore looked at the stone for a long moment. You're going to tell me something now, Harry said. Something you've been holding in reserve. Something you've been deciding whether to tell me since I walked through that door. The headmaster's eyes came up from the stone to Harry's face. You are very perceptive, Dumbledore said. I've been told. Another pause, and in it Harry felt the thing that the whole evening had been building toward, not the confrontation with Quirrell, which had been the practical problem, but this, the conversation in the quiet office between two people whose relationship to the year's events was entirely different from the relationship that either of them had been assumed to have. There is a piece of the problem, Dumbledore said slowly, carefully, that concerns you specifically. Not as the subject of a prophecy. Not as a symbol. As a person. He looked at Harry with something that was not manipulative framing, something more difficult than that, something that looked like genuine reluctance. When Voldemort's curse struck you in Godric's Hollow, it did not simply rebound. Your mother's sacrifice created a protection, yes. But the curse also, fragmented. In the impact. A small piece of what Voldemort had become adhered to the only living thing in the room. Harry looked at him. The scar, he said. Yes. The office was very still. You're telling me, Harry said, that I'm one of the anchors. Unintentionally. Not deliberately created. But structurally, yes. There is a fragment of Voldemort's divided soul lodged in the scar on your forehead. Dumbledore's voice was even, but the evenness cost him something visible. This is why the prophecy's language is what it is. Neither can live while the other survives. The connection between you is not merely the prophecy's decree. It is structural. Physical. Magical. Harry sat with this. He sat with it the way Poseidon had taught him to sit with information about deep ocean systems, not reacting to the surface of it but feeling downward into it, to where it connected with everything else, to the implications beneath the implications. The scar warm on his forehead. The second heartbeat he had always felt in it. The quality he had ascribed to his mother's love, which was also true, the protection was also in it, the two things occupying the same space, the same architecture of that night's magic. He sat with it for a long moment and felt it from the inside, the specific shape of a truth that had been present his whole life, something he had always known without having the vocabulary for it. The thing that was not entirely his own in him. The fragment that belonged to something else. How long have you known? Harry asked. Long enough, Dumbledore said again, and this time Harry heard what was in it, not evasion but the specific weight of a man who had known something terrible about a child for years and had carried it alone. And your plan, Harry said. The plan that required a guided, manageable boy. He paused. Did the plan require him to die? The silence that followed was the longest of the evening. There is a possibility, Dumbledore said, with enormous care, that the destruction of that particular anchor requires, his death, Harry finished. Or an approximation of it. A moment of genuine willingness to die, which would allow the fragment to be destroyed without the host, me, being permanently killed. Because Lily's protection works in both directions. The love she put in me protects me from Voldemort. And the Horcrux in me is also subject to that protection. He looked at Dumbledore with the eyes that were his mother's and his own simultaneously. Did I get that right? Dumbledore's expression was the most unguarded Harry had ever seen it. Essentially, he said softly. Yes. Essentially that. So the plan was to guide me toward a willingness to sacrifice myself, Harry said. Not to trick me into it, I don't think you'd do that. But to shape me into someone who would arrive at that choice naturally. Who trusted you enough to follow the plan to its conclusion without needing to understand the full shape of it until the moment the choice had to be made. Dumbledore was quiet. It's not a bad plan, Harry said. I want to be clear about that. Given the information available, given the boy you expected to be working with, it's actually a very considered plan. The logic is sound. But, Dumbledore said. But I'm not that boy. Harry looked at him evenly. And I'm not going to be managed toward a conclusion without understanding it. I'm going to understand it, and then I'm going to decide what I think the right course of action is, and I'm going to do that. He paused. And I want you to understand something, Headmaster. I'm not saying this to be difficult, or to establish dominance, or to demonstrate that I can't be managed. I'm saying it because the plan only works if the person executing it is fully willing and fully aware. A half-informed actor is a compromised actor. If that moment comes, the choice you're describing, I need to walk into it with every piece of information available, not with a shaped narrative. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. You would still make the choice, he said. Even knowing. I don't know that yet, Harry said. I know enough about what I am and what I value to say it's possible. But I'm not going to pre-commit to dying on a plan I wasn't consulted on. He picked up the tea, which had gone cold, and drank some of it anyway. What I will commit to is working with you, transparently, on what needs to be done. All of it. The anchors, the timeline, the strategy. Together. The headmaster looked at the stone on the desk between them. Then at the boy across from it, who had this evening walked through 7 layers of his security, neutralized a Dark Lord's current vessel, retrieved a magical artifact, and was now sitting in his office at midnight calmly negotiating the terms of their working relationship. Albus Dumbledore, Harry said, with a small and genuine smile, has been doing this alone for too long. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, something old and tired and carefully maintained moving aside for a moment to show something underneath it that was tired in a different way, the tiredness of someone who has been carrying something they were never entirely sure they should be carrying alone and has been offered, for the first time, a hand. I suspect, Dumbledore said, very quietly, that you are right. I know, Harry said. Get some sleep. We'll start properly in the morning. He stood, picked up his empty teacup, set it neatly on the desk, and walked to the door. The phoenix on the perch made a low, musical sound as he passed, not the full song, something quieter, the quality of one note offered to the air. Harry paused at the door. The phoenix, Fawkes. He looked at the bird. The brilliant eyes looked back with the ancient, particular attention of a creature for whom cycles of death and rebirth had made most things comprehensible. He's seen this before, hasn't he? A night like this one. Many times, Dumbledore said, from behind him. Good, Harry said. Then he knows it tends to work out. He went back to Gryffindor Tower, stepping over Peeves on the 4th floor landing, who was so startled by Harry's expression that he forgot to throw anything. Ron and Hermione were in the common room. Of course they were. The fire was low and the room was empty except for the two of them, Ron sitting forward on the hearthrug with his knees pulled up and Hermione cross-legged on the sofa with a book she had clearly not been reading. And when Harry came through the portrait hole both of them looked at him with the specific expression of people who have been waiting in a state of controlled but significant worry and are now performing a rapid assessment of his physical and emotional condition. He sat down in the armchair. The fire popped and settled. Well, Ron said. Quirrell is in the hospital wing, Harry said. Voldemort is dispersed. The stone is with Dumbledore. I've been gone about 90 minutes. Ron and Hermione exchanged a glance. Then Ron looked back at Harry. Are you all right? He asked. It was asked with the directness of a person who actually wanted to know and had no interest in the polite version of the answer. Harry looked at him and found he had no interest in the polite version either. Dumbledore told me something tonight, Harry said. About the scar. He told them. Not all of it, not the full architecture of Dumbledore's plan, which was Dumbledore's to disclose on his own terms in his own time, but the structural fact, the piece that was his, the one that had been his since the night in Godric's Hollow. The fragment in the scar. The anchor he hadn't known he was. Hermione went very still in the specific way she went still when she was processing something that required complete concentration and no output until the processing was done. Ron did not go still, he went the opposite, his hand moving to the arm of the sofa, gripping it once, then releasing it, working through the physical expression of something felt strongly. So, Ron said slowly. It's in you. He put a piece of himself in you, without meaning to. Without meaning to, yes. The curse rebounded, the fragment adhered. I've been carrying it for 11 years. Harry looked at the fire. I've felt it my whole life and thought it was my mother's magic. Which it also is. Both things are true. Does it affect you? Hermione asked. Her voice was very careful. No more than it always has, Harry said. Which is to say it's part of the architecture. I can feel it when I think about it. It doesn't direct anything. Doesn't control anything. He paused. But it's there. What are you going to do about it? Ron asked. Harry looked at him. Ron's expression was steady, practical, direct, the question not asked in panic or horror but in the particular register of someone who has accepted the information and has moved immediately to problem-solving mode, which was, Harry thought, one of the better things about Ron Weasley. I don't know yet, Harry said honestly. There's more to understand before I can answer that. But not tonight. He looked at both of them. Tonight I want to know, did Neville's toad come back this evening? A beat. Trevor. Ron blinked. Yeah, actually. Turned up in the fourth-year corridor according to Seamus. Why, good, Harry said. Neville was worried. Hermione looked at him. Her expression had moved through the processing stage and arrived somewhere that was its own specific register, the look of someone who has understood something about another person and finds it, in the circumstances, more moving than they were prepared for. You nearly died tonight, she said. Not an accusation. Almost an observation, the word nearly carrying more weight than it looked like. I didn't, Harry said. Quirrell tried to kill you. Voldemort tried to kill you. You went through 7 magical barriers alone, I went through them quickly. The challenges were designed for the average witch or wizard, which I'm not. They weren't trivial, they just weren't, he stopped. Looked at her. I wasn't in serious danger. You were in some danger. Some, he conceded. Yes. And your response to some danger is to ask about Trevor the Toad. Trevor matters to Neville. Hermione pressed her lips together. Looked at the fire. Then back at him. You are, she said, with the precision of someone selecting exactly the right word, the most extraordinary and infuriating person I have ever met. Thank you, Harry said. It wasn't entirely a compliment. I know. It was better than a compliment. It was accurate. Ron, who had been watching this exchange with the appreciative attention of someone at a good tennis match, made a sound that was laughter with some of the sound taken out of it. He stretched his legs out toward the fire and laced his hands behind his head and looked at the ceiling with an expression that was exhausted and relieved and something else that was quieter than either. My mum's going to lose her mind when she hears about this, he said. She doesn't need to hear the details, Harry said. She'll find out. She always finds out. It's like a superpower. Ron paused. She's going to want to send you a jumper. I like jumpers, Harry said. Another pause. The fire settled. Outside the common room windows the Scottish dark pressed close and cold, but inside the Gryffindor Tower the warmth was constant and the portraits of former Gryffindors breathed quietly on the walls, and the three of them sat with the specific quality of people who have been through something together and are on the other side of it and haven't needed to say so. "The stone," Hermione said eventually. "What should happen to it?" "Destroyed," Harry said. "Nicholas Flamel has had 600 years. He got his value." He paused. "Dumbledore will suggest it. Nicholas will agree eventually. The world doesn't need a philosopher's stone sitting in a vault attracting dark attention indefinitely." "And Voldemort," she said. "Without the stone. Without Quirrell. He'll find another method. Another host, eventually. Something temporary. He'll keep trying to return to a body." Harry looked at the fire. "There are years ahead of this. The stone was one piece. There are others. Some of them," he stopped. Hermione looked at him with those eyes that missed nothing. "Some of them involve you." "Some of them involve me," he agreed. A silence. "We'll deal with them," Ron said. He said it simply, the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration, with the weight of someone who has decided something and finds the deciding sufficient. Harry looked at him. "We," Harry said. "Obviously we." Ron looked at him with the mild expression of someone who finds it slightly odd that this needs to be confirmed. "Did you think?" He stopped. Looked at Hermione, who was looking at Harry with the same expression. Then back. "Harry. Did you think this was just your problem?" Harry didn't answer immediately. He had known, since the Diagon Alley side street, since the library conversations and the chess games about the chess games, that Ron and Hermione were the realest friends he had ever had. He had known it with the clarity that Poseidon had trained in him, the ability to feel what was true beneath the surface. But knowing something structurally was different from experiencing it in a moment, and the moment was happening now, two people sitting in firelight after midnight looking at him with the uncomplicated certainty that this was shared, that they were in it together, that he did not have to carry it alone. He had two gods who loved him. He had the castle's warmth at his back. He had Lily's love in the scar on his forehead. And he had this. "No," he said. "I didn't think it was just mine." "Right," Ron said. "Good. Then stop making decisions alone in the middle of the night without us." "That's fair," Harry said. "It's extremely fair," Hermione agreed, with the conviction of someone for whom reasonableness was a core value and fairness its highest expression. Harry looked at them both and felt something that had no name in Greek or English or the old language Poseidon sometimes spoke to storms, something full and present and human in the best sense of the word, the thing that was the opposite of what Voldemort had chosen when he started fragmenting himself against the dark. "Right," he said. "Go to sleep. Both of you." "What about you?" Hermione asked. "In a minute." She looked at him once more, the long, assessing look that always ended with a small nod when she had confirmed whatever she was checking for, and then she went. Ron squeezed Harry's shoulder once as he passed, briefly, the physical shorthand of something that didn't need words, and followed. Harry sat alone by the dying fire. He thought about the mirror. What he had seen in it, himself, standing where he stood, the stone in his hand. A mirror designed to show the deepest desire of the person looking into it, and what it had shown him was himself. Not a family. Not his parents. Not glory or power or even the specific victories the year had been moving toward. Himself. Standing exactly where he was. Doing exactly what he was doing. He thought about what that meant. Not the absence of longing for his parents, the longing was there, had always been there, the warm distant light that was Lily Potter, the photographic father who smiled from pictures he had found in the secondary vault, the ghost of a family he had never had. But the longing was not the deepest thing. The deepest thing was simpler and harder to name than longing. To be what I am, he thought. To stand where I stand. To be full rather than empty, present rather than running. The opposite of everything Voldemort had chosen. He sat with that for a while. Then he did the thing he did when he needed to think. He took the stormcord bracelet off his wrist and held it in his palm and let it do what it did, which was generate, very quietly, the specific warmth of a contained lightning charge, small and precise and alive. He held it and looked at it and thought about Zeus, who had given him this, and about how the giving of it had been accompanied by a 10-minute speech about the responsibility of power that had been delivered with such emphatic conviction that Harry had been 12 before he realized it was Zeus's version of nervousness. He thought about Poseidon teaching him to navigate by feel rather than sight. About the 3 weeks with the Norwegian mountain trolls. About Athena losing at Go in a way that was losing and simultaneously a lesson. About the stone collection in the Sea Palace room that was still there, presumably, luminescent shells and unusual rocks arranged on shelves in the cool blue light. He thought about Lily Potter, who had sat in a chair in a house in Godric's Hollow and made herself a shield out of love, deliberate and chosen, and left a piece of it in him that was still warm 11 years later. He thought about the Horcrux in the scar. The fragment of a man who had tried to make himself immortal by dividing himself against endings and had succeeded only in becoming less than he was. A piece of Voldemort lodged in the boy who was Voldemort's opposite, full where Voldemort was empty, connected where Voldemort was severed, willing to die for people where Voldemort had killed them to survive. He thought about Dumbledore's plan, which was not wrong so much as it was incomplete, which had the right destination and the wrong map, had correctly identified what needed to happen and had built the route around a different traveler. The fire was nearly out now, just embers, the common room dim and warm and entirely quiet. Harry sat in it and let himself feel, for the length of one honest moment, what the evening had actually been, the Horcrux revelation, the fragment in himself, the specific weight of knowing that the path ahead had at some point a moment of genuine sacrifice in it, a moment of choosing. Not tonight. Not for years, probably. But present in the future the way deep water was present beneath the surface, not visible, but there, and heavy. He felt it. Then he breathed out. He put the bracelet back on. Felt the castle's warmth settle around him. Heard, very faintly, the wind against the tower windows, a natural wind, undirected, the world doing what it did when no one was shaping it. He was not afraid. That was not bravado. It was not performance. It was simply true, and it was true because he had been raised by people who had shown him what genuine power looked like, not power over death or over others, but the specific power of standing fully in what you were and choosing, freely, what to do with it. He knew what he would choose when the moment came. He didn't need to decide it tonight. But he knew. He stood up from the chair, crossed the common room, stopped at the foot of the dormitory stairs. On the wall beside the staircase, one of the small portraits, a sleeping Gryffindor student from several centuries ago, painted in the corner of a larger landscape, stirred, opened one painted eye, looked at Harry, and closed it again. "Good night," Harry said, to the castle, to the portrait, to the quiet. The fire gave one last low pulse of warmth. He went upstairs. The morning broke clear and cold, the kind of morning Scotland produced after a difficult night as if by way of compensation, full winter sun on the snow, the lock glittering, the grounds impossibly white and the air so sharp it made everything feel new. Harry stood at the dormitory window and watched it and thought that the castle was, among other things, a very good place to wake up. Ron was still asleep. So was Neville, with Trevor on the pillow beside him, a situation that Ron would later have opinions about. Seamus and Dean were somewhere in the territory of half awake. Harry dressed and went downstairs and out through the portrait hole and down through the castle to the Ollery, because he had something to send before breakfast. He wrote 2 letters. The first was short. Poseidon. Something happened last night that changes the shape of the problem. It's bigger than the stone and it involves me more directly than I told you. I'm not in danger, not now. But I need to tell you. Come at Christmas if you can. The second was shorter. Zeus. There's something in the scar. I think you knew. I want to talk about it. Also the plan is working, just not the way anyone planned. He gave both to Lyra, who accepted the weight of both scrolls with the professional dignity of a bird for whom importance of cargo was a matter of indifference to the quality of the flight. She launched from the Ollery window into the clear cold air and went north, and Harry watched her until she was a small white speck against the blue and then gone. He stood at the Ollery window for a while. The grounds below were beginning to show the first signs of other students, a few early risers on the path toward the greenhouses, a Hufflepuff second-year throwing snow at a friend with the specific commitment of someone who had been waiting for proper snow depth. He thought about the mirror. About what it showed him. About what he wanted, not the deep wish version the mirror reflected, but the practical, daily, human version. What the year had given him that he had not expected. Ron's chess face when he realized he was losing. Hermione adjusting her model without being asked. Neville's slow emerging confidence. The castle's warmth around him like a hand. Friends. He had wanted people, he had told Poseidon on the morning of his departure. He had wanted to know what they were like. He knew now. They were extraordinary. Not in the way that gods were extraordinary, not ancient and vast and shaped by millennia. Extraordinary in the daily, specific, unrepeatable way that humans were extraordinary, which was more ordinary and more genuine and more his than anything he had encountered in any divine hall. He had two fathers who were gods. He had two friends who were people. He was, he thought, extremely lucky in the category of people who had chosen to love him. He turned from the window and went down to breakfast, and in the great hall the morning noise was enormous and golden and full of the specific energy of a Friday after a difficult week when the weekend was right there, and Ron was already at the table looking significantly better than the previous night and waving him over, and Hermione was explaining something to Neville with the particular animation she had when she was teaching and finding her student responsive, and the post owls were arriving in their hundreds through the upper windows. Harry sat down. Ron pushed the toast toward him without looking up from the piece of parchment he was reading. Hermione noted his arrival and continued her explanation to Neville without breaking stride, but moved her elbow to make room for him. He made himself a piece of toast and ate it and thought about nothing in particular. Outside, the clear morning held. Dumbledore found him on the grounds at noon. Not accidentally, Dumbledore did very few things accidentally, and his arrival on the path near the lake where Harry had taken to spending his free midday hour was the product of intention. He walked with his hands folded behind his back and his robes doing their thing in the winter wind, looking less like a headmaster on a walk than like a man who had been waiting for a conversation to be ready and had decided it was ready now. Harry was sitting on the usual rock near the lake's edge, throwing small pieces of bread onto the ice that had formed near the bank. The giant squid was somewhere below the unfrozen center, a visible shadow through the dark water. Dumbledore sat on the rock beside him with the ease of a man for whom physical dignity was not contingent on seating arrangements. They sat for a while without speaking. This was, Harry thought, its own kind of test, whether Harry would fill the silence or wait. He waited. The squid moved below the surface. "I sent a letter to Nicholas last night," Dumbledore said. "After our conversation. About the stone. About the stone. He is thoughtful. As always." A pause. "He agreed, I believe, to the conclusion you suggested. Though he has not formally confirmed it." "He will," Harry said. "When you lay it out plainly for him, he'll agree. 600 years is long enough to understand that more time isn't always the thing that's needed." Dumbledore looked out at the lake. "You said something last night. That I had been doing this alone for too long." "Yes. I find myself," he paused, with the specific quality of a man choosing words that are more honest than comfortable. "I find myself wondering whether you are right." "I am," Harry said. "But I'm not telling you that because I want to be right. I'm telling you because the problem ahead, the full shape of it, the anchors, the timeline, is not one person's problem. It's not even two people's problem. It's a structural problem with multiple points of necessary action, and the more isolated the action, the more vulnerability there is at each point." Dumbledore looked at him. "You sound like a general." I've spent time with one. Harry threw the last piece of bread onto the ice. A small bird immediately descended on it from nowhere in particular. I know you don't fully trust me yet. That's reasonable, you've known me for 3 months, and what you found in those 3 months is not what you expected or planned for. Trust takes longer than 3 months. He paused. But I'd like to work on it. If you're willing. The headmaster was quiet for a long moment. The anchor in the scar, he said. You thought about it last night. Yes. And? Harry looked at the lake. At the squid's shadow moving through the dark water, vast and slow and entirely unbothered by the ice above it. And I know what the choice might be. When the time comes. He paused. I'm not afraid of it. I know you're not, Dumbledore said, very softly. That is, in its own way, remarkable. Most people, I was raised by Poseidon, Harry said. He taught me that depth isn't the same as danger. That the unknown isn't the same as the threatening. That the thing under the surface is just, the thing under the surface. He paused. Whatever is under the surface of that choice, I'll look at it directly when I get there. And I'll decide then. Dumbledore was quiet. Then he said, your mother would have liked you very much. The words landed in the cold air and sat there. Harry did not respond immediately. He looked at the lake and felt Lily's magic warm in the scar, the second heartbeat that was hers and the fragments simultaneously, the love that had become structural, architectural, woven into him like warped threads through weft. I think about her, he said. Not as a loss, I didn't have her to lose. As a presence. Something I can almost feel but can't quite reach. She was extraordinary, Dumbledore said. Genuinely and specifically extraordinary. Not in the way that reputation becomes, with simplification and legend. She was complicated and funny and occasionally infuriating and deeply, structurally loving in a way that was, he stopped. When he continued his voice was different. She reminds me of someone I know. Harry looked at him. The headmaster's blue eyes were very old and very honest. Work with me, Harry said. Properly. All the information, all the strategy, genuine collaboration. Not management. Not management, Dumbledore agreed. And in exchange I'll stop going through your security systems without telling you first. That, Dumbledore said, with a quality in his voice that was unmistakably the beginning of a laugh, seems like a reasonably equitable arrangement. Good. The squid surfaced briefly at the lake's center, one long arm rising above the water and then descending in a slow wave, and then was gone again into the dark. Harry watched it go and thought that the year was not over. That there were weeks left before Christmas, and then the rest of the year, and then years beyond this year, and the full shape of what was coming was large and complex and contained at some point a moment of genuine sacrifice that he had decided to walk toward with his eyes open. He thought that this was, all things considered, a life worth living. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs on Privet Drive, dark and small, and the storm that had come for him out of a clear sky, and the 2 ancient figures on a suburban pavement in the middle of the night making a decision that could not be undone. He thought about growing up in storms and in the deep sea and in the libraries of gods, and learning that depth was not danger and the unknown was not threatening and power was not the same as force. He thought about Ron and Hermione in the common room after midnight, steady and present and entirely certain that this was shared. He was 11 years old. He had the whole world ahead of him. He stood up from the rock, brushed snow from his robes, and looked out at the loch and the sky and the castle behind him with its windows full of afternoon light. I'm going to write to my fathers tonight, he said. About the conversation. About the plan going forward. They'll want to know. I imagine, Dumbledore said, standing with considerably more effort than Harry and with considerably more dignity about the effort, that your fathers have been somewhat more attentive to recent events than I may have assumed. Considerably more attentive, yes. I thought as much. A pause. Should I expect a visit from a god at some point in the near future? Possibly 2, Harry said. Forewarned. I shall ensure the castle is presentable, Dumbledore said gravely. Harry smiled. It was the quick, bright, unguarded one, the real one, the one that changed his face. He turned and walked back toward the castle, and Dumbledore walked beside him, and above them the winter sky was the specific deep blue of late December, sharp and clear and enormous, and the castle received them both through its doors with the warmth of something that had been keeping a fire going for them. Chapter 6, King of Sky and Sea. Christmas at Hogwarts was a specific kind of quiet, the big house quiet of a large building with most of its occupants absent, where the remaining sounds carried further and the spaces between them were more present than usual. The castle seemed to breathe differently with fewer people in it, the warmth settling lower, more concentrated, the portraits conducting conversations with each other across empty corridors without the interruption of student traffic. Harry had stayed. He had not debated it. Ron had stayed too, with the cheerful practicality of someone whose home was already full of people and who found the castle's reduced population genuinely restful. Hermione had gone home to her parents, which Harry had encouraged because he had noticed in the last week of term that she was doing the specific thing intelligent people did when under sustained pressure, using additional reading as a displacement activity for processing, consuming information in lieu of feeling things. Her parents, who were dentists in a suburb of London and who loved her in the uncomplicated way parents who are not managing prophecies love their children, were exactly what she needed for 2 weeks. She had left him a list of books she thought he should read over Christmas, which was 12 items long and annotated. He had already read 9 of them and told her so before she left, which produced the expression he privately thought of as her most honest one, a half-second of pure competitive frustration followed by rapid recalibration into respect. She had added 3 more to the list on the spot. He had brought all 12 anyway. Christmas morning arrived with more snow, heavy and particular, the kind that muffled everything and made the world two-tone, white below, grey above, the castle's lit windows the only warmth visible. Harry came downstairs to find Ron already at the fireplace with a pile of presents that suggested the Weasley family had sent representatives of every family member's affection simultaneously. At the foot of Harry's own modest pile was a parcel wrapped in deep blue paper with no label. He knew the wrapping before he touched it, the specific quality of the paper, which moved slightly under his fingers, the way deep water moved. He sat down and opened it carefully. Inside was a cloak of shifting blue-green material that was neither silk nor any fabric Harry could name, that moved between his hands like water held in cloth form. It was warm to the touch and cold to look at, and when he held it up to the light it threw back colors that shouldn't have been visible indoors, deep ocean blue, the specific luminous green of shallow water over white sand, the brief silver of a wave's undersurface caught from below. There was a note in Poseidon's handwriting, which was ancient and slightly fluid and had a tendency to trail off at the ends of letters in the way of someone whose primary medium was water rather than ink. From the deep of the Aegean. The thread was woven by the Nereids at my request, it will keep you warm in Scottish winters, which I understand are notable. It also will not tear. Merry Christmas, Harry. We're coming the 27th. Both of us. P.P.S. Zeus says don't read into the blue. He tried to make it gold and I overruled him. Don't tell him I told you. Ron, who had been watching with the expression of a person watching something he wasn't sure he was supposed to be watching, said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "It's from Poseidon," Harry said. "The god." "The god." "Right." Ron looked at his own pile of presents, which included a jumper that Mrs. Weasley had also sent for Harry, deep green, because Fred had apparently told her Harry's eye color, which Harry found specifically touching, and several large packages of sweets and food items that suggested Mrs. Weasley operated on the principle that no child should be insufficiently fed at Christmas under any circumstances. He held up the green jumper. "For you. Mum said you were to have it immediately." Harry took it and put it on over his shirt with no ceremony and looked at Ron and said, "Your mother is excellent." "She really is," Ron agreed, in the tone of a person who knows this and is sometimes overwhelmed by it. Harry set the Poseidon cloak on the chair beside him and looked at the rest of his pile. A book from Hermione, obviously, the 13th item on the list she hadn't written down, a copy of advanced rune translation with a note inside the cover that said don't pretend you weren't going to look for this yourself. A small package from Hagrid containing what appeared to be a hand-carved wooden figure of a sea-horse, done with more care than technical skill, which Harry found genuinely charming. A letter from Dumbledore, formally worded in the way of someone who was practicing the early stages of a new professional dynamic, containing 3 pieces of actual information about the stone's status and 1 piece of information about Quirrell's condition, which was improving. And 1 more parcel, small and square, wrapped in cloth rather than paper. He unwrapped it. Inside was a smooth stone, dark gray, slightly oval, with a faint iridescent quality to it, the kind that came from specific mineral composition rather than surface treatment. He turned it in his fingers and felt the warmth of it, the specific warmth of something that had sat in the sea for a long time and absorbed the quality of that proximity. There was a note in Zeus's handwriting, which was large and slightly over-emphatic in the way of someone who had been writing in Greek for 3,000 years and found Roman letters slightly ungainly. From your room. The one you said was silly to keep. I disagree. You collected every one for a reason. This one is the first one. You were 2.5 years old and the Nereid Thetis brought it to your door and you picked it up and looked at it for 11 minutes without putting it down. Poseidon wanted to send something impractical. I wanted you to have something real. We'll see you the 27th. ZPS. The cloak was my idea originally. Don't let Poseidon tell you otherwise. Harry held the stone in his palm. Dark gray, iridescent, warm. He had held it for 11 minutes at 2.5 years old, apparently, with the same attention he gave to everything. He closed his fingers around it and held it for a moment. All right? Ron said, quietly, with the specific care of a person who has learned when to ask and when not to. Yes, Harry said. And meant it entirely. The 27th was clear and windless, the kind of winter day that felt like the world making an effort. Harry had told Dumbledore, who had received the information with the careful equanimity of a man who had been mentally preparing himself for a meeting with 2 Olympian gods and found that no amount of preparation was quite equal to the actual prospect. They arrived at noon. Not through the front gates. Not through any door or passage or checkpoint. One moment the castle grounds were empty and snow-white and still, and then they were not. Zeus arrived in the form he favored for significant occasions, not the lightning and thunder theatrical arrival, which was for large spaces and public impact, but simply himself, full presence, the specific quality of something ancient and enormous choosing to be contained in human scale without losing any of the quality that made it what it was. He wore dark robes that moved wrong in the way his clothes always moved wrong, too heavy, too deliberate, carrying their own weather. His hair was loose, his beard neat, his gray-green eyes doing what they always did, which was seeing everything in the available landscape simultaneously and appearing to find it interesting. Poseidon appeared beside him in the way water appeared in low places, without ceremony, simply there, as though he had always been there and had simply become visible. He wore blue-gray, his salt and pepper hair carrying the slight dampness of someone who had been in the Atlantic recently, his eyes the particular November ocean gray that Harry had grown up reading like weather. Both of them looked at Hogwarts. The castle looked back. Harry had been watching from the top of the stone steps leading down to the grounds, and he watched both his fathers take in the castle with the specific attention of people who had seen a great many impressive things over a very long time and were offering a genuine assessment rather than a performative one. Zeus's expression said, substantial, old, loved, aware. He approved. Poseidon's expression said, it knows he's here. He also approved. Harry came down the steps. He was wearing the green Weasley jumper and the Poseidon cloak over it, which was an aesthetic combination that was not exactly dignified but was very honestly him, and he had the dark stone from his room in his pocket. He came down the steps at an even pace and met them at the bottom and stood there. For a moment the 3 of them were simply in the same place, the clean winter air, the snow-white grounds, the castle above. The quality of the moment was something Harry would not have been able to describe adequately to anyone who hadn't been in it. Not emotional, exactly, or not only that. Something more structural. The specific weight of 10 years of a particular life, compressed into this moment of the three of them standing together in a place that was not Olympus and not the Sea Palace and not any of the usual places, a place that was Harry's. Zeus looked at him. The gray-green eyes moved over him with the thoroughness of someone conducting an assessment that was entirely genuine and had nothing performative in it. "You're taller," he said. "It's been 3 months. Children do that. I'm aware." Poseidon was looking at the cloak. "It fits well." "It does. Thank you." Harry paused. "Both of you, for the cloak." "I know it was both of you." A brief silence between Zeus and Poseidon that contained an entire conversation. "The stone," Poseidon said, changing the subject with the efficiency of a man who has won the point he wanted to win and is prepared to move on. "You got it." "In my pocket." "Good." Zeus looked at the castle. "Dumbledore," he said. "He knows you're here. He's prepared." Harry paused. "He's trying to be prepared, which is different. He'll be professional about it." "I'm always professional," Zeus said, in the tone of a man for whom this claim had a complicated relationship with the historical evidence. "You are when it matters," Harry said. "This matters." Zeus looked at him sideways with the particular expression that meant he had been managed by an 11-year-old and had recognized it and was choosing to allow it because the management was correct. "Lead the way," he said. The meeting with Dumbledore was in his office, where the headmaster had arranged things with the careful attention of a man who was aware that receiving divine guests was a specific category of situation for which there was limited available protocol. The tea was better than usual. The chairs had been subtly rearranged. Fawkes was on his perch with the posture of a creature that had been alive long enough to have met beings like these before and was pleased to do so again. Zeus sat in the chair that was clearly the least comfortable and most structurally modest of the available options, which he did because he had recognized immediately that it was and had made a deliberate choice to take it, which Harry noted and appreciated as the specific act of sophisticated diplomacy it was. Poseidon stood, which he usually did in rooms he wasn't sure of, moving slowly around the perimeter of the office with the appearance of mild interest in the instruments and portraits that was actually the careful assessment of a man who read spaces the way he read tides. Dumbledore sat behind his desk and looked at the two gods in his office and managed it with a composure that Harry gave him full marks for. "Headmaster," Zeus said. "My lord," Dumbledore said, and then appeared to briefly reconsider whether lord was the right honorific, decided it was probably the least wrong of available options, and continued. "I want to say that I am grateful Harry was found by people who wanted him," Poseidon said, from across the room, without turning from the portrait he was examining. The word landed with a specific gravity. Dumbledore received it. "Yes," he said. "Who wanted him?" "Petunia Dursley put him in a cupboard," Zeus said, pleasantly. "Yes. In the dark. I was aware of the conditions, though I had hoped the structural mechanism of the blood wards would outweigh the personal experience of the child in the cupboard," Poseidon said, still examining the portrait. He turned now, and his eyes were the November sea, and Dumbledore, who was not a small man in any sense, was briefly, visibly aware of what he was in the presence of. "You made a calculation." "I did," Dumbledore said. "And I would ask you to believe that I regret the necessity of it." "The necessity," Zeus said. "The calculation I made seemed sound," Harry said. Both gods looked at him. So did Dumbledore. "He made a sound calculation with the information he had," Harry said. He was sitting in the chair between his fathers with the ease of someone entirely comfortable with where he was and who he was with. The blood wards would have worked. The protection would have been genuine. The suffering would have been real but survivable, and the result would have been someone capable of the task ahead. He looked at Dumbledore. The calculation was wrong in its premises, not in its logic. The premise was that no better option existed. And a better option did exist, Poseidon said. Apparently, Dumbledore agreed, with a glance at Harry that contained something that was the beginning of genuine rather than professional warmth. "The problem ahead," Zeus said. The conversational diplomacy was gone now, replaced by something older and more direct, the way Zeus sounded when he had decided to stop performing ease and simply say the thing. The anchors. Harry has told us the structure of it. Yes. And your plan? Has been revised, Dumbledore said carefully. Harry and I discussed the revision several days ago. The revision is substantive. He will be fully informed at each stage. He will not be guided toward choices he hasn't been prepared for. A pause. I believe that is not only more ethical but more likely to succeed. Zeus looked at him for a long moment. Poseidon returned to his slow circuit of the room. We will be watching, Zeus said. I expected nothing less. Not as interference. As parents, Harry said. Another moment. Something passed through Zeus's expression that was not quite visible in its entirety but had the quality of something large and true. As parents, he agreed. Dumbledore looked at Harry. The blue eyes were thoughtful and warm and held something that Harry recognized now, the specific regard of a man who had built a plan around a weapon and discovered he was working with a person, and found the person more valuable than the weapon had ever been. I should like, Dumbledore said, to know him better. If that's acceptable. He was speaking to both gods but looking at Harry. He's here, Harry said. You could just talk to him. A sound from Poseidon's corner that was laughter, briefly, then contained. Fawkes on his perch burst into a short, bright burst of song, 3 notes, clean and warm, that filled the circular room and faded into the stone walls and the winter light through the windows. They walked the grounds afterward, the 4 of them, in the way of a group that has concluded formal business and is now simply being in a place together. The snow crunched and the castle rose above them and the loch lay grey and still in the winter light. Dumbledore had found his hat and his students, encountering this procession from upper windows, looked down at it with expressions that would inform their correspondence home for weeks. Zeus asked Dumbledore about the wards on the school with a specificity that revealed he had been thinking about them for some time. Dumbledore answered with matching specificity, and the conversation became technical, the 2 of them moving slightly ahead and talking in the tones of people who have found an unexpected professional common ground. Harry walked beside Poseidon. For a while they didn't speak. Poseidon's pace was slow, deliberate, his eyes on the loch with the habitual attention of someone for whom large bodies of water were always professionally relevant. The squid, Poseidon said eventually. It's friendly, Harry said. We have an understanding. You have an understanding with the Hogwarts lake squid. You have an understanding with the kraken. I created the kraken. You introduced me to it at age 9. Supervised. We've had this conversation. Poseidon made the sound that was not quite a laugh and looked at the loch with what was probably affection by the standards of the god of the sea. They walked a few more steps. The scar, Poseidon said. You knew, Harry said. Not an accusation. I suspected. Since the night we found you. There was something in the quality of the magic in it, not just Lily's work. Something darker threaded through it. He paused. I wanted you to find it yourself. If I had told you at 8, at 9, it would have been information you carried without the context to understand it. And now I have the context. Yes. Poseidon looked at him. How are you carrying it? Harry thought about how to answer this honestly. Like deep water, he said finally. You know it's there. You know it has weight and pressure. You don't panic about the pressure, you learn to move in it. Poseidon was quiet for a moment. Then, you sound like me. You taught me. I know. Something in Poseidon's voice shifted into the register that was his deepest honesty, the one that came from the same place as the ocean's depth, below the performance and the mythology, where things were simply true. I've been thinking about what you said in your letter. That the problem is larger than it appeared. That it involves you more directly. Yes. There is a choice ahead. There might be. And you're not afraid of it. No. Poseidon stopped walking. Harry stopped beside him. Ahead, Zeus and Dumbledore continued their war discussion with the momentum of two people who had found a subject they agreed on more than expected. The lock was very still. "I want you to tell me," Poseidon said, "if it becomes something that requires more than courage." "If it becomes something that requires," he stopped. The November eyes were very direct. "I will not interfere with what is yours to do. But I will not stand at a safe distance pretending I am comfortable with it." "I know," Harry said. "When it comes," Poseidon said, "I want you to know." He stopped again. In 10 years of watching Poseidon navigate every conversation from tidal physics to theological debate to Olympian politics, Harry had never seen him stop in the middle of a sentence twice. "I want you to know that what you are is what we were trying to make. Not a weapon. Not a vessel for a prophecy. Yourself. Fully. Everything you've become." He looked at the lock. "It surpasses what we imagined. You surpass it." The winter air was very still. Above them a cloud moved across the sun and then moved on again, and the light came back full and cold and clear. "I know," Harry said. "You showed me how." Poseidon looked at him once more. The November eyes were wet, which Harry was aware of and which Poseidon was aware of Harry being aware of, and neither of them made anything of it because they were both people who understood that depth was not the same as performance. "Come on," Harry said. "Zeus is about to challenge Dumbledore on the ward architecture for the East Tower and he's going to be right, which is going to be interesting." Poseidon looked ahead to where Zeus was indeed gesturing at the East Tower with the enthusiasm of a man who has identified an error and is very interested in discussing it with someone qualified to understand the error. Dumbledore's expression was that of a man who has just been told something technically correct that is nonetheless inconvenient. Poseidon made the not-quite-laugh sound. They walked forward to catch up. They stayed until evening. The four of them had dinner in the Great Hall, just the four of them and the few students and staff who had remained, the long tables mostly empty but the warmth of the room unchanged. Zeus ate with the appetite of someone who appreciated human food in the specific way of someone who didn't need it, which was to say enthusiastically and with opinions. He declared the roast potatoes excellent, which caused the house elf responsible to be quietly informed of this by McGonagall and to spend the remainder of the evening in a state of profound professional satisfaction. Poseidon ate less and talked more, which was reversed from his usual mode, and Harry understood that the talking was the thing, that his father wanted the texture of the evening, the specific quality of Harry in his own place with his own people. Poseidon asked Ron questions about Quidditch with genuine interest, and Ron, after an initial moment of processing the fact that the god of the sea was asking him about the Chudley Cannon's defensive lineup, answered with the enthusiastic detail of someone who had been waiting for someone to actually want to know. Zeus asked Dumbledore about the Mirror of Erised with a specificity that suggested Harry's letter had been thorough, and Dumbledore described it with the careful honesty of someone who was practicing a new professional mode, and Zeus listened without comment but with the particular attention of someone building a complete picture. After dinner, Harry took his fathers to the Gryffindor common room. Not formally, he simply took them there, through the portrait hole, into the room with its fire and its battered furniture and its specific domestic warmth, the jumpers and books and the chess set that was still set up from the morning's game. Zeus stood in the middle of the Gryffindor common room and looked around it with an expression that Harry read carefully. He looked at the chess set. The books, including the one from Hermione with its annotated note inside. The stone from the Sea Palace on the mantelpiece where Harry had placed it. The Poseidon cloak folded over the chair. Then he looked at the fire, and Harry saw him do the thing that Zeus almost never did, the thing underneath the king of the gods, underneath the archetype and the mythology, the thing that was just a person who had made a choice on a suburban pavement in the middle of the night and had been changed by it. "You're happy here," Zeus said. "Yes," Harry said. "This specific place. These specific people. Yes." Zeus looked at the fire for another moment. "When I found you," he said, "in that house. In that cupboard." He paused. "I was not planning to stay. Either of us. We were going to assess the situation. Determine what needed to be done. Make arrangements. Another pause. And then I picked you up. Harry looked at him. You were awake, Zeus said. 1 year old, in the dark, and you were awake and you looked at me. The way you look at things. Like you were deciding what to make of me. He turned from the fire to look at Harry directly. And I thought, whatever this child is, he is not going in a cupboard. Harry held the look and felt everything in it, the decade it contained, the life that had been built from that one decision, the man he had become inside the space that decision had opened. I know, Harry said. I want you to know, Zeus said, with the specific emphasis of a man who is not prepared to let this slide into assumed knowledge, that it was not the magic. It was not the prophecy or the scar or the power we felt in you. I have met power before. Power does not make me pick up a child and decide his life is mine to protect. He paused. You were a person. 1 year old, and already entirely yourself. That was why. The fire crackled. The room was warm and quiet. Zeus, Harry said. Yes. I know that too. Zeus looked at him for one more moment. Then he did the thing he almost never did and put his hand on Harry's shoulder and kept it there, briefly, the weight of it, the specific weight of someone who doesn't make physical gestures lightly and means this one completely. Then he dropped his hand and turned back to the room with the air of a man resuming his normal mode of dignity. The chess set, he said. Who are you playing? Ron. He's very good. He should be. He has good instincts. Zeus studied the board. He left you a trap here, by the way. You haven't sprung it yet. I know. I'm waiting to see what he does with it. Zeus looked at the board and then at Harry with the expression of a teacher encountering evidence that a student has surpassed the lesson. Good, he said, simply. They left at dusk. Harry walked them to the grounds, past the castle gates, past Hagrid's hut where a light burned in the window, out to the open space where the grounds met the beginning of the forbidden forest, the last light going gold above the trees. They stood for a moment. The year isn't over, Poseidon said. No. There are months yet. Exams. Other things. Harry paused. Nothing on the scale of December, probably. But the year isn't static. Right, Poseidon said. I always write. Write more. I'll try. Zeus looked at the castle behind Harry, the lit windows, the towers, the specific quality of a place made of old stone and older magic and the accumulated presence of 10 centuries of people who had loved it. Then he looked at Harry with the gray-green eyes that had looked at him first in a cupboard under the stairs in the dark. The summer, Zeus said. I'll come home. Both homes, Poseidon said. Both homes. A pause. The gold light shifted on the snow. Somewhere in the forbidden forest something large moved through trees and was quiet again. Harry, Zeus said. Yes. You are the king of sky and sea. He said it not as a title. Not as a prophecy or a declaration or a strategic positioning. He said it the way you said something that had always been true and you were simply naming it last, the way the sea named itself in the sound of waves, the way the sky named itself in the weight of weather. Plainly and completely and with the specific simplicity of the most honest things. Harry looked at him. At both of them, Poseidon with his ocean eyes, Zeus with his sky eyes, two ancient things who had stood on a suburban pavement 11 years ago and made a choice that could not be undone and had not, for a single day of the decade since, wanted to undo it. I know, Harry said. He said it the same way Zeus had said the other thing, not as acceptance of a title but as recognition of a truth. I know what I am. I know who made me. I know what I carry and where I stand and what I'll do with it. Something in both God's expressions, in the same moment, with the unconscious synchrony of people who had spent a decade building something together, settled into a quality that Harry had no single word for. It was pride, but it was more than pride. It was the specific thing that happened when you had given something everything you had and watched it become more than what you gave. Zeus straightened his cuffs. Poseidon looked at the lock one last time with professional appreciation. They stood there in the fading gold of the shortest days and looked at the boy who had been a scar in a cupboard and was now, exactly this, standing in the snow in a Weasley jumper and a sea cloak with his mother's eyes and his father's lightning in his blood and the deep ocean patience of his other father and a scar on his forehead that was both wound and weapon and love. Then they were simply not there. The way they had left everything, eventually. The way gods moved when they were done being visible. Harry stood on the snowy grounds and felt the castle behind him and the forest ahead and the vast cold sky above and the specific quality of the moment that was his now, not theirs, not anyone's plan or prophecy or management, simply his, the future open in front of him and entirely unscripted. He stood there for a while. The stars were starting above the forbidden forest, the first ones, early and bright in the darkening blue. He found Orion, always the first one he looked for, because Orion had been pointed out to him by Poseidon at age 4 with the instruction that if he was ever lost he should find Orion first and navigate from there. A good hunter, Poseidon had said. Thorough. Harry looked at the stars and thought about the year. About Ron and Hermione in the common room after midnight. About the mirror showing him himself. About the scar and what was in it and what he had decided about what was in it. About Dumbledore sitting across the desk at midnight relearning what kind of person he was dealing with. About a troll walking out of a bathroom on its own authority. About a sorting hat saying oh in his mind with the surprise of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years and had not previously encountered anything like this. About a stone in his pocket from his room in the Sea Palace. About a cloak woven by Nereids at his other father's request. About the first stone, the one he had held for 11 minutes at 2.5 years old because it was luminescent and oceanic and he had not been ready to put it down. About Lily Potter, who was in the scar warm against his forehead, who had known what love could do when it was deliberate and complete and freely given. He thought about the years ahead. There were more anchors to find, more chambers to descend into, more choices coming that he would walk toward with open eyes. There was a Dark Lord rebuilding himself somewhere in the margins of the world, patient and desperate and running on borrowed time and borrowed bodies, who would eventually have enough of a form to act and would act in the direction of Harry Potter and would discover, in that action, what 10 years of absence had actually produced. Not a damaged boy. Not an isolated boy. Not a boy who could be frightened or managed or sacrificed without his knowledge. Someone who had grown up in lightning and sea depth and the libraries of gods and the common room of Gryffindor Tower and who had read the prophecy in the Fates archive and understood what the power he knows not actually meant. Wholeness. The power of being entirely, unashamedly, unmistakably yourself. Not divided against endings. Not fragmented against fear. Full, of love and friendship and grief and humor and the specific warmth of people who chose you and people you chose and a mother's magic woven into the architecture of your survival. He would meet Voldemort again. He knew that. Several times, probably, across several years, in several forms of increasing desperation. And each time, the fundamental incomprehension would be the same, not of Harry's power, which was significant, but of what produced it. What Voldemort had made himself incapable of understanding. You could not fragment yourself against death and then understand someone who had never been afraid of it. Harry put his hands in his pockets, the stone in one, the bracelet on his wrist warm, the cloak moving around him in the windless air with the memory of deep currents, and turned back toward the castle. The lights were on in every window. The great hall glowed gold. Somewhere in the east tower the ward that Zeus had identified as structurally deficient was presumably awaiting the conversation between Dumbledore and Zeus that would result in its revision. Hagrid's chimney was producing a steady thread of smoke. The portrait of the fat lady was visible through the tower window, conducting what appeared to be an animated conversation with someone Harry couldn't see. The castle's warmth met him as he came up the steps, the specific sensation of a place that knew him, had known him since that first night when it had paid attention and he had led it, that had adjusted its staircases and kept its fires and moved its light for him in the small patient ways of something that had decided he was worth keeping warm. He put his hand on the stone wall of the entrance and felt it breathe. "Good night," he said. The wall was warm under his hand. Warmer than stone had any reason to be. He went inside. Ron was in the common room when he got there, the chess set rearranged and a new game started, a cup of hot chocolate steaming on the side table. He looked up when Harry came through. "How were they?" he asked. "Good," Harry said. "Zeus found a flaw in the East Tower wards." "Of course he did." Ron moved a pawn. "Your turn. And before you say anything, yes, I see the trap. I left it there deliberately." Harry sat down and looked at the board with genuine attention. "I know," he said. "Then you know what I'm going to do with it." "I have some ideas," Harry said. "Let's find out." He moved his knight. Ron looked at the board. Then at Harry. Then back at the board with the expression of a man watching a simple situation become complicated in a way that was both infuriating and, underneath that, deeply satisfying, the satisfaction of playing against someone who was genuinely good, who made you better just by making you think harder. Outside, the winter stars were fully present, filling the Scottish sky from horizon to horizon, Orion in the east exactly where he was supposed to be. The castle was warm and the fire was high and the chess game unfolded move by move in the Gryffindor common room, two boys figuring out the shape of a problem together, and the night held around them with the solid warmth of something that intended to keep doing so. Harry moved his bishop. Ron said something appreciative and slightly profane. Harry smiled. The year was not over, and the years ahead were long, and somewhere in the cold dark Voldemort was rebuilding himself toward a reckoning that would find Harry exactly as he was, whole, unafraid, standing in the full weight of everything he had been given and everything he had become. The king of sky and sea, in a Weasley jumper, playing chess by the fire. Ready for all of it.